So welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. Flubbed that intro. Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. We're starting a little late, so I won't have a ton for the last time on this time. But last time on Paper Cuts, we met John Carter, who is a former Confederate soldier, wrong side of the Civil War. Although he technically was listed in the book as a mercenary, so he didn't actually list up. Anyway, a Southern mercenary during the Civil War. John Carter ran out of war to fight and called out to the planet Mars as he saw it rising upon the horizon, and found himself sucked forward by an unknown force. And when he came to, he was in a planet. He was on a planet that had red sand as far as the eye could see, and two moons. And of course, we, the reader, know that he made it to Mars. There was an opening paragraph about how he was buried in a tomb that could only open from the inside. Clearly, he expects to be able to come back to life after he's died, but we don't know much about that. What we do know is that John Carter has found himself in quite an interesting predicament here. He is defending a more humanoid Martian named Deja Thoris. After unknowingly stealing, uh, you know, in a tribal fashion, stealing these several Martians' societal standings. And, uh-oh, gang. He likes Deja Thoris a lot. So, that's it in a nutshell. If you want the longer version, go listen to last week's podcast. I'm here with Appy Slices and peanut butter. Well, enjoy your Appy Slices and peanut butter. I am literally about to start the story with Chapter 11, with Deja Thoris. As we reached the open, the two female guards who had been detailed to watch over Deja Thoris hurried up and made as though to assume custody of her once more. The poor child shrank against me, and I felt her two little hands fold tightly over my arm. Waving the women away, I informed them that Sola would attend the captive hereafter, and I further warned Sarkoja that any more of her cruel attentions bestowed upon Deja Thoris would result in Sarkoja's sudden and painful demise. Aside, if you missed this last week, he's on Mars, so all of his muscles are calibrated to Earth gravity, which Mars gravity is not, all of Earth gravity, so he's very strong here. He can leap unimaginably high. He has, every time he has tried to, fell someone in combat, it's taken like one or two titanic punches on his account. He's very much a super powered character, even though, despite the fact that he is an ordinary human man. Also, he taught himself telepathy in like a week, or in like a couple months, because telepathy is like the standard way of talking here. He just taught himself telepathy in a couple months. He's like, yeah, sure. What's it, like, hard? Anyway. My threat was unfortunate and resulted in more harm than good to Deja Thoris, for, as I learned later, men do not kill women upon Mars, nor women men. So Sarkoja merely gave us an ugly look and departed to hatch up deviltries against us. I soon found Sola and explained to her that I wished her to guard Deja Thoris as she had guarded me, that I wished her to find other quarters where they would not be molested by Sarkoja, and I finally informed her that I myself would take up my quarters among the men. Sola glanced at the accoutrements which were carried in my hand and slung across my shoulder. You are a great chieftain now, John Carter, and I must do your bidding, though indeed I'm glad to do it under any circumstances. The man whose metal you carry was young, but he was a great warrior, had by his promotions and kills won his way close to the rank of Taurus Tarkus, who, as you know, is second to Loquas Tomel only. You are 11th. There are but 10 chieftains in this community who rank you in prowess. And if I should kill Lord Costomel, you would be first, John Carter, but you may only win that honor by will of the entire council that Lorquas Tormel meet you in combat, or should he attack you, you may kill him in self-defense and thus win first place. I laughed and changed the subject. I had no particular desire to kill Lorquas Tormel, and less to be a Yed among the Tharks. I accompanied Sola and Deja Thoris in search for new quarters, which we found in a building near the audience chamber and of far more pretentious architecture than our former habitation. We also found in this building real sleeping apartments with ancient beds of highly wrought metal swinging from enormous gold chains depending from the marble ceilings. The decoration of the walls was most elaborate, and unlike the frescoes in the other buildings I had examined, portrayed many human figures in the compositions. These were of people like myself, and of a much lighter color than Deja Thoris. They were clad in graceful, flowing robes, highly ornamented with metal and jewels. Their luxuriant hair was of a beautiful golden and reddish bronze. The men were beardless, and only a few wore arms. The scenes depicted, for the most part, a fair-skinned, fair-haired people at play. Deja Thoris clasped her hands with an exclamation of rapture as she gazed upon these magnificent works of art, wrought by a people long extinct, while Sola, on the other hand, apparently did not see them. We decided to use this room, on the second floor and overlooking the plaza, for Deja Thoris and Sola, and another room adjoining and in the rear for cooking and supplies. I then dispatched Sola to bring the bedding and as much food and utensils as she might need, telling her that I would guard Deja Thoris until her return. As Sola departed, Deja Thoris turned to me with a faint smile. "And where to, then, would your prisoner escape should you leave her? Unless it was to follow you and crave your protection and ask your pardon for the cruel thoughts she's harbored against you these past few days." "You're right. There's no escape for either of us unless we go together." "I heard your challenge to the creature you call Tars Tarkas, and I think I understand your position among these people, but what I cannot fathom is that your statement that you're not of Barsoom." "In the name of my first ancestor, then, where may you be from? You are like unto my people, and yet so unlike. You speak my language, yet I heard you tell Tars Tarkas you had but learned it recently. All Barsoomians speak with the same tongue, from the ice-clad south to the ice-clad north, though their written languages differ. Only in the Valley Door, where the river Is empties into the lost Sea of Chorus, is there supposed to be a different language spoken, except in the language of the ancestors. There's no record of a Barsoomian returning from up the river Is, from the shores of Chorus in the Valley of Dor." "Don't tell me you've thus returned. They'd kill you horribly upon anywhere on this surface of Barsoom if that were true. Tell me it's not." Her eyes were filled with a strange, weird light. Her voice was pleading, and her little hands, reached up upon my chest, were pressed against me as though to wring a denial from my very heart. "I did not know your customs, Deja Thoris, but in my own Virginia a gentleman doesn't lie to save himself. I'm not of Dor. I've never seen the mysterious Is. The lost Sea of Chorus is still lost, as far as I'm concerned. Do you believe me?" And then it struck me, suddenly, that I was very anxious that she should believe me. It wasn't that I feared the results which would follow a general belief that I'd returned from the Barsoomian heaven or hell, or whatever it was. Why was it, then? Why should I care about what she thought? I looked down at her beautiful face upturned, and her wonderful eyes opening up the very depth of her soul, and as my eyes met hers I knew why, and I shuddered. A similar wave of feeling seemed to stir her. She drew away from me with a sigh, and her earnest, beautiful face turned up to mine. She whispered, "I believe you, John Carter. I don't know what a gentleman is, nor have I ever heard of Virginia, but on Barsoom no man lies. If he does not wish to speak the truth, he's merely silent. Where is this Virginia, your country, John Carter?" she asked me, and it seemed that this fair name of my fair land had never sounded more beautiful than it had fell from those perfect lips on that far-gone day. "I am of another world, the great planet Earth. It revolves about our common sun, next within the orbit of your Barsoom, which we know as Mars. How I came here I cannot tell you. I do not know. But here I am, and since my presence has permitted me to serve Deja Thoris, I'm glad that I'm here. She gazed at me with troubled eyes, long and questioningly. That it was difficult to believe my statement, I well knew, nor could I hope that she would do so, however much I craved her confidence and respect. I would much rather not have told her anything of my antecedents, but no man could look into the depth of those eyes and refuse her slightest behest. Finally, she smiled and, rising, said, I shall have to believe, even though I cannot understand. I can readily perceive you're not of the Barsoom of today. You're like us, yet different. But why should I trouble my poor head with such a problem when my heart tells me that I believe because I wish to believe? It was good logic, good, earthly, feminine logic, and if it satisfied her, I could certainly pick no flaws in it. As a matter of fact, it was about the only kind of logic that could be brought onto bear about my problem. We fell into a general conversation then, asking and answering many questions on each side. She was curious to learn of the customs of my people, and displayed a remarkable knowledge of events on Earth. When I questioned her closely on this seeming familiarity with earthly things, she laughed and cried out, Why, every schoolboy on Barsoom knows the geography and much concerning the flora and fauna, as well as the history of your planet, fully as well as of his own. Can we not see everything which takes place upon Earth, as you call it? Is it not hanging there in the heavens, in plain sight? This baffled me, I must confess, fully as much as my statements had confounded her, and I told her so. She then explained in general the instruments her people had used and been perfecting for ages, which permit them to throw upon a screen a perfect image of what is transpiring upon any planet and upon many of the stars. These pictures are so perfect and in detail that when they're photographed and enlarged, objects no greater than a blade of grass may be distinctly recognized. I afterward, in Helium, saw many of these pictures, as well as the instruments which produced them. What a wild, concept that doesn't come up in, anything but pulps anymore is, oh yeah, this planet can see our planet super easily in just incredible detail. That just doesn't come up anymore. We know too much about how light behaves in the vacuum of space and stuff. Even the average person's like, no, light don't do that anymore. So it's fun to see this. It's also a great hand wave to have everyone a little familiar with Earth instead of just, what is this Earth of which you speak? You know. If then you're so familiar with earthly things, why is it you don't recognize me as identical with the inhabitants of that planet? She smiled again, as one might in bored indulgence of a questioning child. Because, John Carter, nearly every planet and star having atmospheric conditions at all approaching those of Barsoom shows forms of animal life almost identical with you and me. And further, Earthmen, almost without exception even, cover their bodies with strange, unsightly pieces of cloth. Please hold. There are currently beans on the table, which have been expressly prohibited. Excuse me, sir? Are you aware you are not allowed to have your beans on the table? No, don't show my beans to the internet! No! No! Too bad. Too bad. Internet saw your beans. Your toe beans. Because you were a bad man. We don't go on the table, sir. As I have mentioned several times, Magnus is in a little shirt because he has a little bald patch on his shoulders. Because he's very anxious about anything and everything. And we can't have him picking all his fur off, can we? Yeah, sniff, snorf. Why don't you stay right there? That's a good spot for you. Anyway. I stopped mid-sentence. I'll start over. Because, John Carter, nearly every planet and star having atmospheric conditions at all approaching those of Barsoom shows forms of animal life almost identical with you and me. And further, Earthmen, almost without exception, cover their bodies with strange, unsightly pieces of cloth, and their heads with hideous contraptions, the purpose of which we've been unable to conceive, while you, when found by the Tharkan warriors, were entirely undisfigured and unadorned. The fact that you wore no ornaments is a strong proof of your unbarsumian origin, while the absence of grotesque coverings might cause a doubt as to your earthliness. I then narrated my details of the departure. I then narrated my details of the departure from Earth, explaining that my body there lay fully clothed in all the, to her, strange garments of mundane dwellers. Magnus, you really want the world to see your beans tonight, don't you? You're full of problems. Yeah, full of problems. Full of problems, little man. Look at these toe beans. Toe beans on a bad man. Bad and naughty boy. Okay, okay. We don't need to give Dad the kickies. I will put the jacket in the closet so you are not so tempted. I actually might just leave it sitting here next to me. Oh, full of interruptions tonight, aren't we, Kitty? I leave the house for a few hours, and it's just the end of the work. I'm gonna sit on this, actually. He is just a baby boy. He's just a little guy. He knows the rules, and so do I. He needs to be a good little man. Yeah, go cause problems up there. There are comparatively less problems for you to cause up there. Anyway, where was I? I then narrated the details. Why can't I say this sentence? I've fumbled over it 3 times. I then narrated the details of my departure from the earth, explaining that my body lay there, fully clothed in all the, to her, strange garments of mundane dwellers. At this point, Sola returned with our meager belongings and her young Martian protege, who, of course, would have to share the quarter with them. Sola asked us if we had a visitor during her absence, and seemed much surprised when we answered in the negative. It seemed that she had mounted the approach to the upper floors, where our quarters were located, that she'd met Sarkoja descending. We decided she must have been eavesdropping, but that we could recall nothing of importance that passed between us. We dismissed the matter as of little consequence, merely promising ourselves to be warned to the utmost caution in the future. Oh, I know, you leave, Magnus. Jail for further 1,000 years. Library's the same way. I tell them, I say I won't be too long, and I tell them exactly where I go, and that keeps them from panicking so bad that they puke or something, because Library has a very bad habit of eating too fast, and when he panics, he eats too fast, and then he pukes. He's a very anxious little man. But when I tell them where I go, they don't have that problem. But I still get a little bit of jail for father for 1,000 years out of the both of them. Deja Thoris and I then fell to examining the architecture and the decorations of the beautiful chambers of the building we were occupying. She told me that these people had presumably flourished over 100,000 years before. They were the early progenitors of her race, but had mixed with the other great race of the early Martians, who were very dark, almost black in skin, and also with the reddish-yellow race which had flourished at the same time. These 3 great divisions of the higher Martians had been forced into a mighty alliance, as the drying up of the Martian seas had compelled them to seek the comparatively few and always diminishing fertile areas, and to defend themselves under the new conditions of life against the wild hordes of the green men. Ages of close relationship and intermarrying had resulted in the race of red men, of which Deja Thoris was a fair and beautiful daughter. During the ages of hardship and incessant warring between their own various races, as well as with the green men, and before they had fitted themselves to the changed conditions, much of the high civilization and many of the arts of the fair-haired Martians had become lost. But the red race of today had reached a point where it feels that it's made up in new discoveries and in a more practical civilization for all that lies irretrievably buried with the ancient Barsumians. beneath the countless intervening ages. These ancient Martians had been a highly cultivated and literary race, but during the vicissitudes of those trying centuries of readjustment to new conditions, not only did their advancement and production cease entirely, but practically all archives, records, and literature were lost in the process. Deja Thoris related many interesting facts and legends concerning the lost race of noble and kindly people. She said that the city in which we were camping was supposed to have been a center of commerce and culture, known as Korad. It had been built upon a beautiful natural harbor, landlocked by magnificent hills. The little city on the west front of the little valley on the west front of the city, she explained, was all that remained of that harbor, while the pass through the hills to the old sea bottom had been the channel through which the shipping passed the city's gates. The shores of the ancient seas were dotted with just such cities, and lesser ones, in diminishing numbers, were to be found converging toward the center of the oceans, as the people had found it necessary to follow the receding waters until necessity had forced upon them their ultimate salvation, the so-called Martian canals. We had been so engrossed in exploration of the building and in our conversation that it was late in the afternoon before we realized it. We were brought back to a realization of our present conditions by a messenger bearing a summons from Lorquas Tomel, directing me to appear before him forthwith. Bidding Deja Thoris and Sola farewell, and commanding Woola to remain on guard, I hastened to the audience chamber, where I found Lorquas Tomel and Tars Tarkas seated upon the rostrum. Chapter 12. A Prisoner with Power. This is really good. I like this tea a lot. I'm not usually one to be very big on teabag tea, but this is a good one. I definitely should get it loose next time I'm near a stash. Stash is in the tea store, for context. Anyway, Chapter 12. As I entered and saluted, Lacrosse Tomel signaled me to advance, and fixing his great hideous eyes upon me, addressed me thus. Before he addresses me thus, this is, it's called Christmas in Paris. Well, no, it's not called Christmas in Paris. The caffeinated version of it is called Christmas in Paris. Oh no, I lied. The caffeinated version is called Breakfast in Paris. That's a, it is lavender and bergamot. It is an Earl Grey with lavender and vanilla. The one I'm drinking tonight is chocolate, peppermint, lavender, and vanilla. And it's quite good. Really, I do prefer the lavender Earl Grey. I have some lavender Earl Grey, but it's too late in the night for that. I also have a chocolate mint. It's caffeinated, which is fun. But you'll probably be seeing a lot more of this Christmas in Paris as the weather grows colder. In addition to the Mr. Hyde blend, Dr. Jekyll's the caffeinated one, I think. You'll be seeing more of that one as we saw last winter. You'll probably be seeing a lot more of just generally decaf teas. I've got a few more around. Anyway, where was I? Tomel was addressing our main character here. Yeah, the lavender in the caffeinated version, it fits really well. It plays off of the bergamot oil very, very well. Lavender and Earl Grey are a surprisingly good match. Anyway, Tomel was saying something.
You have been with us a few days, yet during that time you have by your prowess won a high position among us. Be that as it may, you are not one of us, and you owe us no allegiance. Your position is a peculiar one. You are a prisoner, and yet you give commands which must be obeyed. You are an alien, and yet you are a Thorkian chieftain. You are a midget, and yet you can kill a mighty warrior with one blow of your fist. And now you are reported to have been plotting to escape with another prisoner of another race. A prisoner who, from her own admission, half believes you are returned from the Valley of Dor. Either one of these accusations, if proved, could be sufficient grounds for your execution. But we are a just people, and you shall have a trial on our return to Thark, if Tal Hajus so commands. But, he continued in his fierce, guttural tones, if you run off with the red girl, it is I who shall have to account to Tal Hajus. It is I who shall have to face Tars Tarkus and either demonstrate my right to command, or the medal from my dead carcass will go to a better man, for such is the custom of the Tharks. I have no quarrel with Tars Tarkus. Together we rule supreme the greatest of the lesser communities among the green men. We do not wish to fight between ourselves, and so if you were dead, John Carter, I should be glad. Under two conditions only, however, may you be killed by us without orders from Tal Hayus. In personal combat in self-defense, should you attack one of us, or were you apprehended in an attempt to escape. As a matter of justice, I must warn you that we await only one of those two excuses for ridding ourselves of so great a responsibility. The safe delivery of the Red Girl to Tal Hayus is one of the greatest importance. Not in 1,000 years have the Tharks made such a capture. She is the granddaughter of the greatest of the Red Jadaks, who is also our bitterest enemy. I have spoken. The Red Girl told us that we were without the softer sentiments of humanity, but we are a just and truthful race. You may go.
Turning, I left the audience chamber. So this was the beginning of Sarkoja's persecution. I knew that none other could be responsible for this report which had reached the ears of Lacoste Tomel so quickly, and now I recalled those portions of our conversation which had touched upon escape and upon my origin. Sarkoja was at this time Tars Tarkus's oldest and most trusted female. As such, she was a mighty warrior behind the throne, for no warrior had the confidence of Lacoste Tomel to such an extent as did his ablest lieutenant, Tars Tarkus. However, instead of putting thoughts of possible escape from my mind, my audience with Lacoste Tomel only served to center my every faculty on that subject. Now, more than ever before, the absolute necessity for escape, insofar as Deja Thoris was concerned, was impressed upon me, for I was convinced that some horrible fate awaited her at the headquarters of Tal Hayus. As described by Sola, this monster was the exaggerated personification of all the ages of cruelty, ferocity, and brutality from which he had descended. Cold, cunning, calculating, he was also, in marked contrast to most of his fellows, a slave to that most brute passion which the waning demands for procreation upon their dying planet has almost stilled in the Martian chest. The thought that the divine Deja Thoris might fall into the clutches of such an abysmal atavism started a cold sweat upon me. Far better that we save friendly bullets for ourselves at the last moment, as did those brave frontier women of my lost land who took their own lives rather than fall into the hands of the native braves. As I wandered about the plaza, lost in my gloomy forebodings, Tars Tarkus approached me on his way from the audience chamber. His demeanor toward me was unchanged, and he greeted me as though we had not just parted a few moments before.
Where are your quarters, John Carter?
I've selected none. It seemed best that I quartered either by myself or among the other warriors, and I was waiting an opportunity to ask your advice. As you know, I am not yet familiar with all the customs of the Tharks. Bless you, Magnus. He had himself some sneezes. Come with me, he directed, and together we moved across the plaza to a building which I was glad to see adjoined that occupied by Sola and her charges. My quarters are on the first floor of this building, and the second floor is also occupied by warriors, but the third floor and floors above are vacant. You may take your choice of those. I understand that you've given up your woman to the Red Prisoner. Oh, well, wait, no. That is still Tartarchus, right? Yeah, he continues. I understand that you've given up your woman to the Red Prisoner. Well, as you have said, your ways are not our ways, but you can fight well enough to do as you please. And so if you wish to give your woman to a captive, it is your own affair. But as a chieftain, you should have those to serve you, and in accordance with our customs, you may select any or all the females from the retinues of the chieftains whose metal you now wear. I thanked him, but assured him I could get along very nicely without assistance, except in the matter of preparing food, and so he promised to send women to me for this purpose, and also for the care of my arms and the manufacture of my ammunition, which he said would be necessary. I suggested that they might also bring some of the sleeping silks and furs which belonged to me as spoils of combat, for the nights were cold, and I had none of my own. He promised to do so, and departed. Left alone, I ascended the winding corridor to the upper floors in search of suitable quarters. The beauties of the other buildings were repeated in this one, and as usual, I was soon lost in a tour of investigation and discovery. I finally chose a front room on the third floor because this brought me nearer to Deja Thoris, whose apartment was on the second floor of the adjoining building, and it flashed upon me I could rig up some means of communication whereby she might signal me in case she needed either my services or my protection. Adjoining my sleeping apartment were baths, dressing rooms, and other sleeping and living apartments, in all some 10 rooms on this floor. The windows of the back rooms overlooked an enormous court which formed the center of the square made by the buildings which faced the 4 contiguous streets, and which was now given over to the quartering of the various animals belonging to the warriors occupying the adjoining buildings. While the court was entirely overgrown with the yellow moss-like vegetation which blankets practically the entire surface of Mars, yet numerous fountains, statuary, benches, and pergola-like contraptions bore witness to the beauty which the court must have presented in bygone times, when graced by the fair-haired, laughing people whom stern and unalterable cosmic laws had driven not only from their homes, but from all except the vague legends of their descendants. One could easily picture the gorgeous foliage of the luxuriant Martian vegetation which once filled this scene with life and color, the graceful figures of the beautiful women, the straight and handsome men, the happy frolicking children, all sunlight, happiness, and peace. It was difficult to realize that they had gone, down through ages of darkness, cruelty, and ignorance, until their hereditary instincts of culture and humanitarianism had ascended once more in the final composite race which is now dominant upon Mars. My thoughts were cut short by the advent of several young females bearing loads of weapons, silks, furs, jewels, cooking utensils, and casks of food and drink, including considerable loot from the aircraft. All this, it seemed, had been the property of the 2 chieftains I'd slain, and now, by the customs of the Tharks, had become mine. At my direction, they placed the stuff in one of the back rooms, then departed, only to return with a second load, which they advised me constituted the balance of my goods. On the second trip, they were accompanied by 10 or 15 other women and youths, who, it seemed, formed the retinues of the 2 chieftains. They were not their families, nor their wives, nor their servants. The relationship was peculiar, and so unlike anything known to us that it's most difficult to describe. All property among the Green Martians is owned in common by the community, except the personal weapons, ornaments, and sleeping silks and furs of the individuals. These alone can one claim undisputed right to, nor may he accumulate more of these than are required for his actual needs. The surplus he holds merely as custodian, and it is passed on to the younger members of the community as necessity demands. The women and children of a man's retinue may be likened to a military unit for which he is responsible in various ways, as in matters of instruction, discipline, sustenance, and the exigencies of their continual roamings and unending strife with other communities and with the Red Martians. These women are in no sense wives. The Green Martians use no word corresponding in meaning with this earthly word. Their mating is a matter of community interest solely, and is directed without reference to natural selection. The council of chieftains of each community control the matter as surely as the owner of a Kentucky racing stud directs the scientific breeding of his stock for the improvement of the whole. In theory it may sound well, as is often the case with theories, but the result of ages of this unnatural practice, coupled with the community interest in the offspring being held paramount to that of the mother, is shown in the cold, cruel creatures and their gloomy, loveless, mirthless existence. It's true that the Green Martians are absolutely virtuous, both men and women, with the exception of such degenerates as Talhuyus, but better far a finer balance of human characteristics, even at the expense of a slight and occasional loss of chastity. Finding that I must assume responsibility for these creatures, whether I would or not, I made the best of it, and directed them to find quarters on the upper floors, leaving the third floor to me. One of the girls I charged with the duties of my simple cuisine, and directed the others to take up the various activities which had formerly constituted their vocations. Thereafter, I saw little of them, and neither did I care to. It's beginning to sound like Mars really is a red planet, huh? Anyway, Chapter 13, Love-Making on Mars. Following the battle with the airships, the community remained within the city for several days, abandoning the homeward march until they could feel reasonably assured that the ships would not return, for to be caught on the open plains with a cavalcade of chariots and children was far from the desire of even so warlike a people as the Green Martian. During our period of inactivity, Tarkus had instructed me in many of the customs and arts of war familiar to the Tharks, including lessons in riding and guiding the great beasts which bore the warriors. These creatures, which are known as thoats, are as dangerous and vicious as their masters, but when once subdued are sufficiently tractable for the purposes of the Green Martian. 2 of these animals had fallen to me from the warriors whose metal I wore, and in a short time I could handle them quite as well as the native warriors. The method was not at all complicated. If the thoats did not respond with sufficient celerity to the telepathic instruction of their riders, they were dealt a terrific blow between the ears with the butt of a pistol, and if they showed fight this treatment was continued, until the brutes were either subdued or had unseated their riders. Oh, my phone is ringing. Sorry, dear, I'm reading. She'll notice I'm live after everything. Where was I? In the latter case, it became a life and death struggle between the man and the beast. If the former were quick enough with his pistol, he might live to ride again, though upon some other beast. If not, his torn and mangled body was gathered up by his women and burned in accordance with Tharkian custom. My experience with Woola determined me to attempt the experiment of kindness in my treatment of my thoats. First, I taught them that they could not unseat me, and even rapped them sharply between the ears to impress upon them my authority and mastery. Then, by degrees, I won their confidence, in much the same manner as I'd adopted countless times with my many mundane mounts. I was ever a good hand with animals, and by inclination, as well as because it brought more lasting and satisfactory results, I was always kind and humane in my dealings with the lower orders. I could take a human life, if necessary, with far less compunction than that of a poor, unreasoning, irresponsible brute. In the course of a few days, my thoats were the wonder of the entire community. They'd follow me like dogs, rubbing their great snouts against my body in awkward evidence of affection, and respond to my every command with an alacrity and docility which caused the Martian warriors to ascribe to me the possession of some earthly power unknown on Mars. "How have you bewitched them?" asked Tarkus one afternoon, when he had seen me run my arm far between the great jaws of one of my thoats, which had wedged a piece of stone between two of his teeth while feeding upon the moss-like vegetation within our courtyard. "By kindness. You see, Tarkus, the softer sentiments have their value, even to a warrior. In the height of battle, as well as upon the march, I know that my thoats will obey my every command, and therefore my fighting efficiency is enhanced, and I'm a better warrior for the reason that I'm a kind master. Your other warriors would find it to the advantage of themselves, as well as the community, to adopt my methods in this respect. Only a few days since, you yourself told me that these great brutes, by the uncertainty of their tempers, were often the means of turning victory into defeat, since, at a crucial moment, they might elect to unseat and rend their riders." "Show me how you accomplish these results," was Tarkus' only rejoinder. And so I explained, as carefully as I could, the entire method of training I had adopted with my beasts. And later he had me repeat it before Tomel and the assembled warriors. That moment marked the beginning of a new existence for poor thoats, and before I left the community of Tomel, I had the satisfaction of observing a regiment of as tractable and docile mounts as one might care to see. The effect on the precision and celerity of the military movements was so remarkable, rather, that Tomel presented me with a massive anklet of gold from his own leg, as a sign to his appreciation of my service to the Horde. For the Horde! On the 7th day, following the battle with the aircraft, we again took up the march toward Thark, all probability of another attack being deemed remote by Tomel. During the days just preceding our departure, I had seen but little of Deja Thoris, as I had been kept very busy by Tarkus with my lessons in the art of Martian warfare, as well as in the trainings of my thoats. The few times I had visited her quarters, she had been absent, walking upon the streets with Solo, or investigating the buildings in the near vicinity of the plaza. I'd warned them against venturing far from the plaza, for fear of the great white apes, whose ferocity I was only too well acquainted with. However, since Woola accompanied them on all their excursions, and as Solo was well armed, there was comparatively little cause for fear. On the evening before our departure, I saw them approaching along one of the great avenues which led into the plaza from the east. I advanced to meet them, and telling Solo that I would take responsibility for Deja Thoris' safekeeping, I directed her to return to her quarters on some trivial errand. I liked and trusted Solo even, but for some reason I desired to be alone with Deja Thoris, who represented to me all that I had left behind on Earth in agreeable and congenial companionship. There seemed bonds of mutual interest between us, as powerful as those we had been born under the same roof rather than born upon different planets, hurtling through space some 48 millions of miles apart. That she shared my sentiments in this respect I was positive, for on my approach the look of pitiful hopelessness left her sweet countenance, to be replaced by a smile of joyful welcome, as she placed her little right hand upon my left shoulder in true red Martian salute. "Sarkoja told Sola that you'd become a true Thark, and that I would now see no more of you than any of the other warriors." "Well, Sarkoja's a liar of the first magnitude. notwithstanding the proud claim of the Tharks to absolute verity. Deja Thoris laughed at this. I knew that even though you became a member of the community, you would not cease to be my friend. A warrior may change his metal, but not his heart, as is the saying upon Barsoom. I think they've been trying to keep us apart, for whenever you've been off duty, the women of Charles Tarkus's retinue has always arranged to trump up some excuse to get Sola and me out of sight. They've had me down in the pits below the buildings, helping them mix their awful radium powder and make their terrible projectiles. You know that these have to be manufactured by artificial light. Exposure to sunlight always results in an explosion. You've noticed their bullets explode when they strike an object? Well, the opaque outer coating is broken by the impact, exposing a glass cylinder. It's almost solid. It's in the forward end of which is a minute particle of radium powder. The moment the sunlight, even though diffuse, strikes the powder, it explodes with a violence that nothing can withstand. If you ever witness a night battle, you note the absence of these explosions, while the morning following the battle will be filled at sunrise with sharp detonations of exploding missiles fired the preceding night. As a rule, however, non-exploding projectiles are used at night. I've used the word radium in describing this powder because, in the light of the recent discoveries on Earth, I believe it to be a mixture of which radium is the base. In Captain Carter's manuscript, it's mentioned always by the name used in the written language of helium, and is spelled in hieroglyphics, which would be difficult and, by far, useless to reproduce. While I was much interested in Deja Thoris's explanation of this wonderful adjunct to Martian warfare, I was more concerned by the immediate problem of their treatment of her. That they were keeping her away from me was not a matter for surprise, but that they should subject her to dangerous and arduous labor filled me with rage. Have they ever subjected you to cruelty and ignominy? Try that again. Have they ever subjected you to cruelty and ignominy, Deja Thoris? I asked, feeling the hot blood of my fighting ancestors leap in my veins as I awaited her reply. Only in little ways, John Carter. Nothing that can harm me outside my pride. They know that I'm the daughter of 10,000 Jadaks, that I traced my ancestry straight back without a break to the builder of the first great waterway, and they, who do not even know their own mothers, are jealous of me. At heart, they hate their horrid fates, and so wreak their poor spite on me, who stand for everything they have not, and for all they most crave and never can attain. Let us pity them, my chieftain, for even though we die at their hands, we can afford them pity, since we're greater than they, and they know it. Had I known the significance of those words, my chieftain, as applied by a red Martian woman to a man, I should have found the surprise of my life, but I didn't know that at the time, nor for many months thereafter. Yes, I still had much to learn upon Barsoom. I presume it's the better part of wisdom. I presume it's the better part of wisdom that we bow to fate with as good grace as possible, Deja Thoris. But I hope, nevertheless, that I may be present the next time that any Martian, green, red, pink, or violet, has the temerity to even so much as frown on you, my princess. Deja Thoris caught her breath at my last words, and glanced upon me with dilated eyes and quickening breath. Then, with an odd little laugh, which brought roguish dimples to the corners of her mouth, she shook her head and cried, "What a child! A great warrior, and yet a stumbling little child!" "Oh, what have I done now?" I asked in sore perplexity. "Some day you shall know, John Carter, if we live. But I may not tell you, and I, the daughter of Moors Kajak, son of Chardos Moors, has listened without anger," she soliloquized in conclusion. Then she broke out again into her gay, happy, laughing moods, joking with me on my prowess as a Thark warrior, as contrasted with my soft heart and natural kindliness. "I presume that should you accidentally wound an enemy, you'd take him home and nurse him back to health." "Well, that's precisely what we do on Earth, at least among civilized men." This made her laugh again. She couldn't understand it, for with all her tenderness and womanly sweetness, she was still a Martian, and to a Martian the only good enemy is a dead enemy. For every dead foeman means so much more to divide between those who live. I was very curious to know what I had said or done to cause her so much perturbation a moment before, and so I continued to importune her to enlighten me. No, it is enough that you have said it, and that I have listened. And when you learn, John Carter, and if I be dead, as likely as I shall be, ere the further moon has circled Barsoom another 12 times, remember that I listened, and I smile. It was all Greek to me, but the more I begged her to explain, the more positive became her denials of my request, and so, in very hopelessness rather, I desisted. Day had now given away to night, and as we wandered along the great avenue lighted by the 2 moons of Barsoom, and with Earth looking down upon us out of her luminous green eye, it seemed that we were alone in the universe, and that I, at least, was content that it should be so. The chill of the Martian night was upon us, and removing my silks, I threw them across the shoulders of Deja Thoris. As my arm rested for an instant upon her, I felt a thrill pass through every fiber of my being, such as contact with no other mortal has even produced. And it seemed to me that she'd leaned very slightly toward me, but of that I wasn't sure. Only I knew that as her arm rested there, across her shoulders, longer than the act of adjusting the silk required, that she did not draw away, and nor did she speak. And so, in silence, we walked the surface of a dying world, but in the breast of in one of us, at least, had been born that which is ever oldest, yet ever new. I loved Deja Thoris. The touch of my arm upon her naked shoulder had spoken to me in words I would not mistake, and I knew that I had loved her since the first moment that my eyes had met hers, that first time in the plaza of the dead city of Korad. Ooh, everybody cue the like Valentine's Day orchestra stings. Earthman has found an alien girl to like. We all knew this was coming. Even if you don't know this book, as soon as he was rattling on about like, oh, I caught her eyes and big swoon, you knew it was happening. Hi, Raz. Happy to have you here. Careless Whisper. It's a little early for Careless Whisper. Cue the like several barbershop chords in the back. What's a good barbershop love song that would work here? You know what would make a fun pun is My Wild Irish Rose. That'd be a good one cuz she's red. Sometimes I make myself laugh. Where was I? We were about to start this chapter. Let me get a little more water. Thought I got my sip on. Chapter 14, A Duel to the Death. My first impulse was to tell her of my love, and then I thought of the helplessness of her position, wherein I alone could lighten the burdens of her captivity, and protect her in my poor way against the thousands of hereditary enemies she must face upon our arrival at Thark. Enjoy your lurk, Raz. Hang on, let me activate lurk. Oop, now you're lurking. Arrival at Thark. I could not chance causing her additional pain or sorrow by declaring a love which, in all probability, she did not return. Should I be so indiscreet, her position would be even more unbearable than now, and the thought that she might feel that I was taking advantage of her helplessness to influence her decision was the final argument which sealed my lips. Finally a character in one of these books that has seen some sense and is like, huh, I'm in a peculiar position of power over this girl. Maybe I shouldn't confess yet. Finally someone with a brain. Sorry, I'm just so sick of the trope of like, yes, I have swooped in to save this person, but we're not done saving this person. But I now have feelings for them. I'm like, wait until after you're out of this. It's very refreshing to see someone with half a brain. Anyway, why are you so quiet, Deja Thoris? Possibly you'd rather return to Sola in your quarters? No, I am happy here. I do not know why it is that I should always be happy and contented when you, John Carter, a stranger, are with me. Yet at such times it seems that I'm safe, and that with you I shall soon return to my father's court, and feel his strong arms about me, and my mother's tears and kisses on my cheek. Do people kiss, then, here upon Barsoom? I asked, when she had explained the words she used, in answer to my inquiries as to its meaning. Parents, brothers, and sisters, yes. And then she added in a low, thoughtful tone, lovers. And you, Deja Thoris, have parents and brothers and sisters? Yes. And, lover? She was silent, nor could I venture to repeat the question. The man of Barsoom, she finally ventured, does not ask personal questions of women, except his mother and the woman he's fought for and won. But I've fought, I started, and then wished I'd cut my tongue from my mouth, for she turned even as I caught myself and ceased. And without another word, she drew my silks from her shoulder and held them out to me, with head held high. She moved with the carriage of the queen, as she was toward the plaza and the doorway of her quarters. Ooh, you stepped in it, sir. Also, bless you, Magnus. So many sneezes. I did not attempt to follow her, other than to see that she reached the building in safety, but directing Woola to accompany her, I turned disconsolately and entered my own house. Excuse me. I sat for hours cross-legged and cross-tempered upon... Oh, no, horrible time for hiccups. Give me a second. Oh, I should have a hiccups command. That's a good idea. Hopefully holding my breath fixed that. Cross-legged and cross-tempered upon my silks. That's where we were. I turned disconsolately and entered my own house. I sat for hours cross-legged and cross-tempered upon my silks, meditating upon the queer freak that chance plays upon us poor devils of mortals. Let me give one more take at that. That was a strange phrase. I sat for hours, cross-legged and cross-tempered, upon my silks, meditating upon the queer freaks that chance plays upon us, the poor devils of mortals. So this was love. I'd escaped it for all the years I'd roamed the 5 continents and their encircling seas. In spite of beautiful women and urging opportunity, in spite of a half-desire for love and a constant search for my ideal, it had remained for me to fall furiously and hopelessly in love with a creature from another world, of a species similar possibly, yet not identical with mine. A woman who was hatched from an egg, and whose span of life might cover 1,000 years, whose people had strange customs and ideas, a woman whose hopes, whose pleasures, whose standards of virtue and of right and wrong might vary as greatly from mine as did those of the green Martians. Yes, I was a fool, but I was in love, and though I was suffering the greatest misery I'd ever known, I would not have had it otherwise for all the riches of Barsoom. Such is love, and such are lovers wherever love is known. To me, Deja Thoris was all that was perfect, all that was virtuous and beautiful and noble and good. I believe that from the bottom of my heart, from the depth of my soul, on that night in Korad, as I sat cross-legged upon my silks, while the nearer moon of Barsoom raced through the western sky toward the horizon, and lighted up the gold and marble and jeweled mosaics of my world-old chamber, and I believe it today as I sit at my desk in the little study overlooking the Hudson. 20 years have since intervened. For 10 of them I lived and fought for Deja Thoris and for her people, and for 10 I have lived upon her memory. The morning of our departure for Thark dawned clear and hot, as do all Martian mornings, except for the 6 weeks when the snow melts at the poles. I sought out Deja Thoris in the throng of departing chariots, but she turned her shoulder to me, and I could see the red blood mounting to her cheeks. With the foolish inconsistency of love, I held my peace when I might have pled ignorance of the nature of my offense, or at least the gravity of it, and so have effected, at worst, a half conciliation. Okay, there's clearly supposed to be an image here, because it says, I sought out Deja Thoris in the throng of departing chariots, twice in slightly larger fonts. So to me, that reads like there is an illustration in the original version of this book. I did not get the illustrated version of this book. Anyway, my duty dictated that I must see that she was comfortable, and so I glanced into her chariot and rearranged her silks and furs. In doing so, I noted with horror that she was heavily chained by one ankle to the side of the vehicle. "What does this mean?" I cried, turning to Sola. "Sarkoja thought it best," she answered, her face betokening her disapproval of the procedure. Examining the manacles, I saw that they fastened with a massive spring lock. "Where is the key, Sola? Let me have it." "Sarkoja wears it, John Carter." I turned, without further word, and sought out Tarkus, to whom I vehemently objected to the unnecessary humiliations and cruelties, as they seemed to my lover's eyes, that were being heaped upon Deja Thoris. Oh, what? You don't want me to have cute little pictures? This is a podcast. Nobody gets to see the pictures. You can go look up the pictures yourself. It's on Gutenberg. Sorry, where was I? John Carter, if ever you and Deja Thoris escape the Tharks, it will be upon this journey. We know that you will not go without her. You've shown yourself a mighty fighter, and we do not wish to manacle you, so we hold you both in the easiest way that will yet ensure security. I have spoken. The people want picture books. If people want picture books that bad, they can come yell about it in Discord, and I will consider it. I don't know. I mean, obviously the pictures have to be in the public domain as well as the rest of the text, or they wouldn't be on Gutenberg. But actually, there's a... Wait a minute, I might be wrong. There might actually be... They might have crammed all the illustrations at the end of this book. Give me a second. Yeah, because early on, it lists illustrations, like, super early in the book. So we'll come back to those. That's a treat for everyone at the end of the book. Stick around, and you'll get your pictures. I saw the strength of his reasoning at a flash, and knew that it was futile to appeal from his decision, but I asked that the key be taken from Sarkoja, and that she be directed to leave the prisoner alone in the future. This much, Tarkus, you may do for me, in turn to the friendship that I must confess I feel for you. Friendship? There is no such thing, John Carter. But have your will. I shall direct that Sarkoja cease to annoy the girl, and I myself will take custody of the key. Well, unless you wish me to assume the responsibility, I said with a smile. He looked at me long and earnestly before he spoke. Were you to give me your word that neither you nor Deja Thoris would attempt to escape until after we have safely reached the court of Tal Hajuz, you might have the key and throw the chains into the river Is. Well, it were better that you held the key, Tarkus. He smiled and said no more, but that night, as we were making camp, I saw him unfasten Deja Thoris's fetters himself. With all his cruel ferocity and coldness, there was an undercurrent of something in Tarkis which he seemed ever battling to subdue. Could it be a vestige of some human instinct, come back from an ancient forebear to haunt him with the horror of his people's ways? Yes, Twitch gremlins do love little treats. Stick around for the little treats. We may reach the little treats this evening. Who knows? As I was approaching Deja Thoris's chariot, I passed Sarkoja, and the black, venomous look she accorded me was the sweetest balm I'd felt for many hours. Lord, how she hated me! It bristled from her so palpably one might have almost cut it with a sword. A few moments later, I saw her deep in conversation with a warrior named Zad, a big, hulking, powerful brute, but one who had never made a kill among his own chieftains, and so was still an Omad, or man with one name. He could win a second name only with the metal of some chieftain. It was this custom which entitled me to the names of either of the chieftains I'd killed. In fact, some of the warriors addressed me as Dotar Soyat, a combination of the surnames of the two warrior chieftains whose metal I'd taken, or in other words, whom I had slain in a fair fight. As Sarkoja talked with Zod, he cast occasional glances in my direction, while she seemed to be urging him very strongly to some action. I paid little attention to it at the time, but the next day I had good reason to recall the circumstances, and at the same time gain a slight insight into the depths of Sarkoja's hatred, and the lengths of which she was capable to going to wreak her horrid vengeance on me. Deja Thoris would have none of me again on this evening, and though I spoke her name, she neither replied nor conceded by so much the flutter of an eyelid that she realized my existence. In my extremity, I did what most other lovers would have done. I sought word from her through an intimate. It was in this instance it was Sola whom I intercepted in another part of the camp. What's the matter with Deja Thoris? I blurted out at her. Why will she not speak to me? Sola seemed puzzled herself, as though strange actions on the part of two humans were quite beyond her, indeed as they were, poor child. She says you've angered her, and that is all she'll say, except that she's the daughter of a Yed, and the granddaughter of a Yadak, and she's been humiliated by a creature who could not polish the teeth of her grandmother's Sirach. I pondered over this report for some time, finally asking, what might a Sirach be, Sola? Oh, a little animal about as big as my hand, which the red Martian women keep to play with. Not fit to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat. Must rank pretty low in the consideration of Deja Thoris, I thought. But I couldn't help laughing at the strange figure of speech, so homely and in this respect so earthly. That does sound like a weird, regionalism from Earth. Not fit to polish the teeth of my grandmother's cat. That's one heck of a phrase. I might keep that one. Who knows? Anyway, it made me homesick, for it sounded very much like not fit to polish her shoes. And then commenced a train of thought quite new to me. I began to wonder what my people at home were doing. I had not seen them for years. There was a family of Carters in Virginia who claimed close relationship with me. I was supposed to be a great-uncle or something of the kind equally foolish. I could pass anywhere for 25 to 30 years of age, and to be a great-uncle always seemed the height of incongruity for my thoughts. Or rather, the height of incongruity, for my thoughts and feelings were those of a boy. There were two little kiddies in the Carter family whom I had loved and whom I thought there was no one and who had thought that there was no one on earth like Uncle Jack. I could see them just as plainly as I stood there under the moonlit skies of Barsoom, and I longed for them as I never longed for any mortals before. By nature a wanderer, I'd never known the true meaning of the word home, but the great hall of the Carters had always stood for all the world that it did. But the great hall of the Carters had always stood for all that the word did mean to me, and now my heart turned toward it from the cold and unfriendly peoples I had been thrown amongst. For did not even Deja Thoris despise me? I was a low creature, so low, in fact, that I was not fit to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat. Then my saving sense of humor came to my rescue, and, laughing, I turned into my silks and furs, and slept upon the moon-haunted ground the sleep of a tired and healthy fighting man. We broke camp the next day at an early hour, and marched with only a single halt just before dark. Two incidents broke the tediousness of the march. About noon we espied far to our right what was evidently an incubator, and Lorquas Tomel directed Tarkus to investigate it. The latter took a dozen warriors, including myself, and we raced across the velvety carpeting of moss to the little enclosure. It was indeed an incubator, but the eggs were very small in comparison with those I'd seen hatching in ours at the time of my arrival on Mars. Tarkus dismounted and examined the enclosure minutely, finally announcing that it belonged to the green men of Warhoon, and the cement was scarcely dry where it had been walled up. "They cannot be a day's march ahead of us," he exclaimed, the light of battle leaping to his fierce face. The work at the incubator was short indeed. The warriors tore open the entrance, and a couple of them, crawling in, soon demolished all the eggs with their short swords. Then, remounting, we dashed back to join the cavalcade. During the ride, I took occasion to ask Tarkus if these warhoons whose eggs we had destroyed were a smaller people than his Tharks. I had noticed that their eggs were so much smaller than those I saw hatching in your incubator. He explained that the eggs had just been placed there, but like all green Martian eggs, they would grow during the 5-year period of incubation, until they obtained the size of those I'd seen hatching on the day of my arrival on Barsoom. This was indeed an interesting piece of information, for it always seemed remarkable to me that the green Martian women, large as they were, could bring forth such enormous eggs as I'd seen the 4-foot infants emerging from. As a matter of fact, the new laid egg is little larger than an ordinary goose egg, and as it does not commence to grow until subjected to the light of the suns, the chieftains have little difficulty in transporting several hundred of them at one time from the storage vaults to the incubators. Shortly after the incident of the Warhoon eggs, we halted to rest the animals, and it was during this halt that the second of the day's interesting episodes occurred. I was engaged in changing my riding cloths from one of the thoats to another, for I divided the day's work between them, when Zad approached me, and without a word struck my animal a terrific blow with his longsword. I did not need a manual of green Martian etiquette to know what reply to make, for, in fact, I was so wild with anger I could scarcely refrain from drawing my pistol and shooting him down for the brute he was. But he stood waiting with drawn longsword. My only choice was to draw my own and meet him in a fair fight with his choice of weapon, or a lesser one. This latter alternative is always permissible, therefore I could have used my short sword, my dagger, my hatchet, or my fists had I wished, and had been entirely within my rights, but I could not use firearms or a spear while he held a longsword. I chose the same weapon he had drawn because I knew he prided himself upon his ability with it, and I wished, if I worsted him at all, to do it with his own weapon. The fight that followed was a long one, and delayed the resumption of the march for an hour. The entire community surrounded us, leaving a clear space, about 100 feet in diameter, for our battle. Zed first attempted to rush me down as a bull might a wolf, but I was much too quick for him, and each time I sidestepped his rushes, he would go lunging past me, only to receive a nick from my sword upon his arm or his back. He was soon streaming blood from a half-dozen minor wounds, but I could not obtain an opening to deliver an effective thrust. Then he changed his tactics, and fighting warily and with extreme dexterity, he tried to do by science what he was unable to do by brute strength. I must admit he was a magnificent swordsman, and had it not been for my greater endurance and the remarkable agility the lesser gravitation of Mars left me, I might not have been able to put up the creditable fight I did against him. We circled for some time without doing much damage on either side. The long, straight, needle-like swords flashed in the sunlight and rang out upon the stillness as they crashed together with each effective parry. Finally, Zad, realizing that he was tiring more than I, evidently decided to close in and end the battle in a final blaze of glory for himself. Just as he rushed me, a blinding flash of light struck full in my eyes, so that I could not see his approach, and could only leap blindly to one side in an effort to escape the mighty blade that seemed I could always feel in my vitals. I was only partially successful, as a sharp pain in my left shoulder attested, but in the sweep of my glance, as I sought to again locate my adversary, a sight met my astonished gaze which paid me well for the wound the temporary blindness had caused me. There, upon Deja Thoris's chariot, stood 3 figures, for the purpose evidently of witnessing the encounter above the heads of the intervening Tharks. There were Deja Thoris, Sola, and Sarkoja, and as my fleeting glance swept over them, a little tableau was presented, which will stand graven in my memory to the day of my death. As I looked, Deja Thoris turned upon Sarkoja with the fury of a young tigress and struck something from her upraised hand, something which flashed in the sunlight as it spun to the ground. Then I knew what had blinded me at that crucial moment of the fight, and how Sarkoja had found a way to kill me without herself delivering the final thrust. Another thing I saw, too, which almost lost my life for me then and there, for it took my mind for the entire fraction of an instant entirely from my antagonist. For as Deja Thoris struck the tiny mirror from her hand, Sarkoja, her face livid with hatred and baffled rage, whipped out her dagger and aimed a terrible blow at Deja Thoris. Then Sola, our dear and faithful Sola, sprang between them. The last I saw was the great knife descending upon her shielding breast. My enemy had recovered from his thrust, and was making it extremely interesting for me, so, reluctantly, I gave my attention to the work at hand, but my mind was not upon the battle. We rushed each other furiously time after time, until suddenly, feeling the sharp point of his sword at my chest, in a thrust I could neither parry nor escape, I threw myself upon him with outstretched sword and with all the weight of my body, determined that I would not die alone if I could prevent it. I felt the steel tear into my chest, all went black before me, my head whirled in dizziness, and I felt my knees give beneath me. Chapter 15. Sola tells me her story. When consciousness returned, and as I soon learned I was down but a moment, I sprang quickly to my feet, searching for my sword. There I found it, buried to the hilt in the green breast of Zad, who lay stone dead upon the ochre moss of the ancient sea bottom. As I regained my full senses, I found his weapon piercing my left breast, but only through the flesh and muscles which cover my ribs, entering near the center of my chest and coming out below the shoulder. As I had lunged, I had turned, so that his sword merely passed beneath the muscles, inflicting a painful but not dangerous wound. Removing the blade from my body, I also regained my own, and turning my back upon his ugly carcass, I moved, sick, sore, and disgusted, toward the chariots which bore my retinue and my belongings. A murmur of Martian applause greeted me, but I cared not for it. Bleeding and weak, I reached my women, who, accustomed to such happenings, dressed my wounds, applying the wonderfully healing and remedial agents which make only the most instantaneous of death blows fatal. Give a Martian woman a chance, and death must take a back seat. They soon had me patched up, so that, except for weakness from the loss of blood and a little soreness round the wound, I suffered no great distress from this thrust, which, under earthly treatment, undoubtedly would have put me flat on my back for days. As soon as they were through with me, I hastened to the chariot of Deja Thoris, where I found my poor Sola with her chest swathed in bandages, but apparently little the worse for her encounter with Sarkoja, whose dagger, it seemed, had struck the edge of one of Sola's metal breast ornaments, and thus deflected, had inflicted but a slight flesh wound. As I approached, I found Deja Thoris lying prone upon her silks and furs, her lithe form racked with sobs. She did not notice my presence, nor did she hear me speaking with Sola, who was standing a short distance from the vehicle. "Is she injured?" I asked of Sola, indicating Deja Thoris by an inclination of my head. "No, she thinks you're dead." "And that her grandmother's cattle now have no one to polish its teeth?" I queried, smiling. "I think you wrong her, John Carter. I do not understand either her ways or yours. But I'm sure the granddaughter of 10,000 Jadaks would never grieve like this over anyone but who held the highest claim upon her affections. They're a proud race, sure, but they're just, as are all Barsumians. You must have hurt or wronged her grievously that she'll not admit your existence living, though she mourns your death. Tears are a strange sight upon Barsoom, and so it is difficult for me to interpret them. I've seen but two people weep in all my life other than Deja Thoris. One wept from sorrow, the other from baffled rage. The first was my mother, years ago, before they killed her. The other was Sarkoja when they dragged her from me today. Your mother? But, Sola, you couldn't have known your mother. But I did, and my father also. If you'd like to hear the strange and unbarsumian story, come in the chariot tonight, John Carter, and I will tell you that of which I have never spoken in all my life before. Now the signal has been given to resume the march. You must go. I'll come tonight, Sola. Be sure to tell Deja Thoris I'm alive and well. I shall not force myself upon her, and be sure that you do not let her know I saw her tears. If she would speak with me, I would but await her command. Sola mounted the chariot, which was swinging into its place in line, and I hastened to my waiting thoat, and galloped to my station beside Tars Tarkas as the rear of the column. We made a most imposing and awe-inspiring spectacle as we strung out across the yellow landscape, the 250 ornate and brightly colored chariots, preceded by an advance guard of some 200 mounted warriors, and chieftains riding 5 abreast and 100 yards apart, and followed by a like number in the same formation, and the score or more of flankers on either side, the 50 extra mastodons, or heavy draught animals known as zitidars. Yeah, zitidars, I did say that right. Known as zitidars, and the 500 or 600 extra thoats of warriors running loose within the hollow square formed by the surrounding warriors. The gleaming metal and jewels of the gorgeous ornaments of the men and women duplicated in the trappings of the zitidars and thoats, and interspersed with the flashing colors of magnificent silks and furs and feathers, lent a barbaric splendor to the caravan which would have turned an East Indian potentate green with envy. Honestly, when they describe something as East Indian, I'm thinking of the East India Company. I'm expecting him to be like, oh man. Like, the way he has described that, my first thought is some, like, tea baron fat cat being like, oh, they have such nice things, you know? Sorry, I wanted to make sure nothing's on fire over here. It doesn't seem to be. Anyway, the enormous broad tires, the chariots, and the padded feet of the animals brought forth no sound from the moss-covered sea bottom, and so we moved in utter silence like some huge phantasmagoria, except when the stillness was broken by the guttural growling of a goaded zitidar, or the squealing of fighting thoats. The green Martians conversed but little, and then usually in monosyllables, low and like the faint rumbling of a distant thunder. We traversed a trackless waste of moss, which, bending to the pressure of broad tire or padded foot, rose up again behind us, leaving no sign that we'd passed. We might indeed have been the wraiths of the departed dead upon a dead sea of that dying planet, for all the sound or sign that we had made in passing. It was the first march of a large body of men and animals I'd ever witnessed which raised no dust and left no spoor, for there is no dust upon Mars, except in the cultivated districts in the winter months, and even then the absence of high winds renders it almost unnoticeable. We camped that night at the foot of the hills we'd been approaching for 2 days, and which marked the southern boundary of that particular sea. Our animals had been 2 days without drink, nor had they water for nearly 2 months, not since shortly after leaving Thark, but, as Tars Tarkas had explained to me, they require but little, and can live almost indefinitely upon the moss which covers Barsoom, and which, he told me, holds in its tiny stems sufficient moisture to meet the limited demands of these animals. After partaking of my evening meal of cheese-like food and vegetable milk, I sought out Solo, whom I found working by the light of a torch upon some of Tarkis's trappings. She looked up at my approach, her face lighting with pleasure and with welcome. "I am glad you came. Deja Thoris sleeps, and I am lonely." "Mine own people do not care for me, John Carter. I am too unlike them. It is a sad fate, since I must live my life amongst them, and often I wish that I were a true green Martian woman, without love and without hope. But I've known love, and so I am lost. I promised to tell you my story, or rather the story of my parents. From what I have learned of you and the ways of your people, I'm sure the tale will not seem strange to you, but among green Martians it has no parallel within the memory of the oldest living Thark, nor do our legends hold many similar tales. My mother, you see, was rather small, in fact too small to be allowed the responsibilities of maternity, as our chieftains breed principally for size. She was also less cold and cruel than most green Martian women, and caring little for their society, she often roamed the deserted avenues of Thark alone, or went and sat among the wild flowers that decked the nearby hills, thinking thoughts and wishing wishes which I believe I alone among Tharkian women today may understand, for am I not the child of my mother? And there among those hills she met a young warrior, whose duty it was to guard the feeding zitidars and thoats, and see that they roamed not beyond the hills. They spoke at first of only such things as interest a community of Tharks, but gradually, as they came to meet more often, and as was now quite evident to both, no longer by chance, talked about themselves, their likes, their ambitions, and their hopes. She trusted him and told him of the awful repugnance she felt for the cruelties of their kind, for the hideous and loveless lives they must ever lead, and then she waited for the storm of denunciation to break from his cold, hard lips, but instead he took her in his arms and kissed her. They kept their love a secret for 6 long years. She, my mother, was of the retinue of the great Tal Hayus, while her lover was only a simple warrior, wearing only his own metal. Had their defection from the traditions of the Tharks been discovered, both would have paid the penalty in great arena before Tal Hayus and the assembled hordes. The egg from which I came was hidden beneath a great glass vessel upon the highest and most inaccessible of the partially ruined towers of ancient Thark. Once each year my mother visited it for the 5 long years it lay there in the process of incubation. She dared not come oftener, for in the mighty guilt of her conscience, she feared that her every move was watched. During this period my father gained great distinction as a warrior, and had taken the medal from several chieftains. His love for my mother had never diminished, and his own ambition in life was to reach a point where he might wrest the medal from Tal Hajus himself, to be free to claim her as his own, as well as, by the might of his power, protect the child which would otherwise be quickly dispatched should the truth become known. It was a wild dream, that of wresting the medal from Tal Hajus in 5 short years, but his advance was rapid, and he soon stood high in the councils of Thark. But one day the chance was lost forever, in so far as it would come in time to save his loved ones, for he was ordered away upon a long expedition to the ice-clad south, to make war upon those natives there, and despoil them of their furs, for such is the manner of the green Marsumian. He does not labor for what he can wrest in battle from others. He was gone for 4 years, and when he returned, all had been over for 3. For about a year before his departure, and shortly after the time of the return of an expedition which had gone forth to fetch the fruits of a community incubator, the egg had hatched. Therefore my mother continued to keep me in the old tower, visiting me nightly and lavishing upon me the love of the community life she had robbed us both of. She hoped, upon the return of the expedition from the incubator, to mix me with the other young assigned to the quarters of Tal Hajus, and thus escape the fate which would surely follow discovery of her sin against the ancient tradition of the green men. She taught me rapidly the language and customs of my kind, and one might say she told me the story I've told to you up to this point, impressing upon me the necessity for absolute secrecy and the great caution I must exercise after she placed me with the other young Tharks, to permit no one to guess that I was further advanced in education than they, nor by any sign to divulge in the presence of others my affection for her or my knowledge of my parentage. Then, drawing me close to her, she whispered in my ear the name of my father. And then a light flashed out upon the darkness of the shower chamber, and there stood Sarkoja, her gleaming, baleful eyes fixed in a frenzy of loathing and contempt upon my mother. The torrent of hatred and abuse she poured out there upon her turned my young heart cold at terror. That she had heard the entire story was apparent. That she suspected something wrong from my that she had heard the entire story was apparent, and that she had suspected something wrong from my mother's long nightly absences from her quarters accounted for her presence there on that fateful night. One thing she had not heard, nor did she know, was the whispered name of my father. This was apparent from her repeated demands upon my mother to disclose the name of her partner in sin, but no amount of abuse or threats could wring this from her. And to save me from needless torture she lied, for she told Sarkoja that she alone knew, nor would she ever tell her child. With final imprecations, Sarkoja hastened away to Talhajus to report her discovery, and while she was gone, my mother, wrapping me in the silks and furs of her night covering so that I was scarcely noticeable, descended to the streets and ran wildly away toward the outskirts of the city, in the direction which led to the far south, out toward the man whose protection she might not claim, but on whose face she wished to look once more before she died. As we neared the city's southern extremity, a sound came to us from across the mossy flat, from the direction of the only pass through the hills which led to the gates, the pass by which caravans from either north, south, east, or west would enter the city. The sounds we heard were the squealing of thoats and the grumbling of zitadars, with the occasional clank of arms which announced the approach of a body of warriors. The thought uppermost in her mind that it was my father, returned from his expedition, but the cunning of the Thark held her from headlong and precipitate flight to greet him. Retreating into the shadows of the doorway, she awaited the coming of the cavalcade which shortly entered the avenue, breaking its formation and thronging the thoroughfare from wall to wall. As the head of the procession passed us, the lesser moon swung clear of the overhanging roofs and lit up the scene with all the brilliancy of her wondrous light. My mother shrank further back into the friendly shadows, and from her hiding place saw that the expedition was not of my father, but the returning caravan bearing the young Tharks. Instantly her plan was formed. As a great chariot swung close to her hiding place, she slipped stealthily in among the trailing tailboard, crouching low in the shadow of the high stride, straining me to her bosom in a frenzy of love. She knew what I did not, that never again after that night would she hold me to her chest, nor was it likely that we would ever look upon each other's faces again. In the confusion of the plaza she mixed me with the other children, whose guardians during the journey were now free to relinquish their responsibility. We were herded together in a great room, fed by women who had not accompanied the expedition, and the next day we were parcelled out among the retinues of the chieftains. I never saw my mother after that night. She was imprisoned by Talhajus, and every effort, including the most horrible and shameful torture, was brought to bear upon her to wring from her lips the name of my father, but she remained steadfast and loyal, dying at last amidst the laughter of Talhajus and his chieftains, undergoing some awful torture. I learned afterwards that she told them she had killed me to save me from a fate similar at their hands, that she'd thrown my body to the white apes. Sarkoja alone disbelieved her, and I feel to this day she suspects my true origin, but does not dare expose me at the present, at all events, because she also guesses, I am sure, the identity of my father. When he returned from his expedition and learned the story of my mother's fate, I was present as Talhajus told him, but never by the quiver of a muscle did he betray the slightest emotion. Only he did not laugh as Talhajus gleefully described her death struggles. From that moment on he was the cruelest of the cruel, and I am awaiting the day when he shall win the goal of his ambition, and feel the carcass of Talhajus beneath his foot, for I am sure that he but waits the opportunity to wreak a horrible vengeance, that his great love is as strong in his chest when it first transfigured him nearly 40 years ago, as I am that we sit here upon the edge of a world-old ocean, while sensible people sleep, John Carter. And your father, Sola, is he with us now? Yes, But he does not know me for what I am, nor does he know who betrayed my mother to Talhajus. I alone know my father's name, and only I and Talhajus and Sarkoja know it was she who carried the tale that brought death and torture upon her he loved. We sat silent for a few moments, she wrapped in the gloomy thoughts of her terrible past, and I in pity for the poor creatures whom the heartless, senseless customs of their race had doomed to loveless lives of cruelty and of hate. And so presently she spoke. John Carter, if ever a real man walked the cold, dead bosom of Barsoom, you are one. I know that I can trust you, and because the knowledge may some day help you, or him, or Deja Thoris, or myself, I'm going to tell you the name of my father, nor place any restrictions or conditions upon your tongue. When the time comes, speak the truth if it seems best to you. Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. I trust you because I know you are not cursed with the terrible truth, or the terrible trait of absolute and unswerving truthfulness, that you could lie like one of your own Virginia gentlemen, if a lie would save others from sorrow or suffering. My father's name, it's Tars Tarkas. Ooh. Ooh. No wonder Tars Tarkas has ambitions. Of course, the guy with the depth of character has backstory as to why. I love it. That's fun. I like that a lot. Oh, we've got one more chapter before we intermiss. Chapter 15. We plan an escape. The remainder of our journey to Thark was uneventful. We were 20 days upon the road, crossing 2 sea bottoms and passing through or around a number of ruined cities, mostly smaller than Karad. Twice we crossed the famous Martian waterways, or canals so called by our earthly astronomers. When we approached these points, a warrior would be sent far ahead with a powerful field glass, and if no great body of red Martian troops was in sight, we could advance as close as possible without chance of being seen, and then camp until dark. When we would slowly approach the cultivated tract, and locating one of the numerous broad highways which crossed these areas at regular intervals, creep silently and stealthily across to the arid lands upon the other side. It required 5 hours to make one of these crossings without a single halt, and the other consumed the entire night, so that we were just leaving the confines of the high-walled fields when the sun broke out upon us. Crossing in the darkness as we did, I was unable to see but little, except as the nearer moon, in her wild and ceaseless hurtling through the Barsoomian heavens, lit up little patches of the landscape from time to time, disclosing walled fields and low, rambling buildings, presenting much the appearance of earthly farms. There were many trees, methodically arranged, and some of them were of enormous height. There were animals in some of the enclosures, and they announced their presence by terrified squealings and snortings as they scented our queer wild beasts and wilder human beings. Only once did I perceive a human being, and that was at the intersection of our crossroad with a wide white turnpike which cuts each cultivated district longitudinally in its exact center. The fellow must have been sleeping beside the road, for as I came abreast of him, he raised upon one elbow, and after a single glance at the approaching caravan, leapt shrieking to his feet and fled madly down the road, scaling a nearby wall with the agility of a scared cat. The Tharks paid him not the slightest attention. They were not out upon the war path, and the only sign that they had seen him was a quickening of the pace of the caravan as we hastened toward the bordering desert, which marked our entrance into the realm of Talhajus. Not once did I have speech with Deja Thoris, as she sent no word to me that I'd be welcome at her chariot, and my foolish pride kept me from making any advances. I verily believe that a man's way with women is in inverse ratio to his prowess among men. The weakling and the saphead often have great ability to charm the fairer sex, while the fighting man, who can face 1,000 real dangers unafraid, sits hiding in the shadows like some frightened child. Just 30 days after my advent upon Barsoom, we entered the ancient city of Thark, from whose long-forgotten people this horde of green men has stolen even their name. The hordes of Thark number some 30,000, and are divided into 25 communities. Each community has its own Yed and lesser chieftains, but all are under the rule of Talhajus, a Jeddak of Thark. 5 communities make their headquarters at the city of Thark, and the balance is scattered among other deserted cities of ancient Mars throughout the district claimed by Talhajus. We made our entry into the great central plaza early in the afternoon. There were no enthusiastic friendly greetings for the returned expedition. Those who chanced to be in sight spoke the names of warriors or women who they came in direct contact with in the formal greeting of their kind, but when it was discovered that they brought 2 captives, a greater interest was aroused, and Deja Thoris and I were the centers of inquiring groups. We were soon assigned to the new quarters, and the balance of the day was devoted to settling ourselves to the changed conditions. My home now was upon an avenue leading into the plaza from the south, the main artery down which we'd marched from the gates of the city. I was at the far end of the square and had an entire building to myself. The same grandeur of architecture which was so noticeable characteristic of Karad was in evidence here, only if that were possible on a larger and richer scale. My quarters would have been suitable for housing the greatest of earthly emperors, but to these queer creatures nothing about a building appealed to them but its size and the enormity of its chambers. The larger the building, the more desirable. And so Talhajus occupied what must have been an enormous public building, the largest in the city, but entirely unfitted for residence purposes. The next largest was reserved for Lorquas Tomel, and the next for a Yed of the lesser rank, and so on to the bottom of the list of the 5 Yeds. The warriors occupied the buildings for the chieftains to whose retinues they belonged, or, if they preferred, sought shelter among any of the thousands of untenanted buildings in their own quarter of town, each community being assigned a certain selection of the city. The selection of building had to be made in accordance with these divisions, except so far as the Yeds were concerned, they all occupied edifices which fronted upon the plaza. When I'd finally put my house in order, or rather seen that it had been done, it was nearing sunset, and I hastened out with the intention of locating Sola and her charges, as I determined upon having speech with Deja Thoris and trying to impress upon her the necessity of our at least patching up a truce till I could find some way of aiding your escape. I searched in vain until the upper rim of the great red sun was just disappearing behind the horizon, and I spied the ugly head of Woola peering from a second-story window on the opposite side of the very street where I was quartered, but nearer the plaza. Without waiting for a further invitation, I bolted up the winding runway which led to the second floor, and, entering a great chamber at the front of the building, was greeted by the frenzied Woola, who threw his great carcass upon me, nearly hurling me to the floor. The old fellow was so glad to see me that I thought he would devour me. His head split from ear to ear, showing his 3 rows of tusks in his hobgoblin smile. Quieting him with a word of command and a caress, I hurriedly looked through the approaching gloom for a sign of Deja Thoris, and then, not seeing her, I called her name. There was an answering murmur from the far corner of the apartment, and, with a couple of quick strides, I was standing beside her, where she crouched among the furs and silks, upon an ancient carved wooden seat. As I waited, she rose to her full height, and looking me straight in the eyes, she said, "What would Dolar Sojat, Thark of Deja Thoris, is captive?" Deja Thoris, I did not know how I have angered you. It was furthest from my desire to ever hurt or offend you, whom I had hoped to protect and comfort. Have none of me, if it is your will, but that you must aid me in effecting your escape, if such a thing be possible, is not my request, but a command. When you're safe once more at your father's court, you... Come on, turn the page. You may do with me as you please, but from now on till that day, I am your master, and you must obey and aid me. She looked at me long and earnestly, and I thought that she was softening toward me. I understand your words, Dr. Sojat, but you I do not understand. You're a queer mixture of child and man, of brute and noble. I only wish that I might read your heart. Well, look down at your feet, Deja Thoris. It lies there now, or has lain since that night at Korad, and where it'll ever lie, beaten alone for you till death stills it forever. She took a little step toward me, her beautiful hands outstretched in a strange, groping gesture. What do you mean, John Carter? What are you saying to me? I'm saying what I promised myself that I'd not say to you, at least till you were no longer a captive among the green men, but from your attitude toward me for the past 20 days, I'd thought never to say to you. I'm saying, Deja Thoris, that I'm yours, body and soul, to serve you, fight for you, and to die for you. The only thing I ask of you in return, and that is that you make no sign either of condemnation or of approbation of my words, till you're safe among your own people, and that whatever sentiments you harbor toward me, they may not be influenced or colored by my gratitude. Whatever I may do to serve you will be prompted solely from selfish motives, since it gives me more pleasure to serve you than not. I will respect your wishes, John Carter, because I understand the motives which prompt them, and I accept your service no more willingly than I bow to your authority. Your word shall be my law. I have twice wronged you in my thoughts, and again I ask for your forgiveness. Further conversation of a personal nature was prevented by the entrance of Sola, who was much agitated and wholly unlike her usual calm and possessed self. That horrible Sarkoja has been before Tal Hajus, and from what I heard upon the plaza, there is little hope for either of you. Well, what do they say? Inquired Deja Thoris. That you'll be thrown to the wild calotes, known as dogs, in the great arena as soon as the hordes have been assembled for the yearly games. Sola, you're a Thark, but you hate and loathe the customs of your people as much as we do. Will you not accompany us in one supreme effort to escape? I'm sure that Deja Thoris can offer you a home, protection among her people, and your fate can be no worse among them than it must ever be here. Yes, come with us, Sola. You'll be better off among the red men of Helium than you are here, and I can promise you're not only a home with us, but the love and affection your nature craves, which must always be denied you by the customs of your own race. Come with us, Sola. We might go without you, but your fate would be terrible if they thought you'd connive to aid us. I know that even that fear would not want to tempt you to interfere in our escape, but we want you with us. We want you to come to a land of sunshine and happiness amongst the people who know the meaning of love, of sympathy, and of gratitude. Say that you will, Sola. Tell me that you will. The great waterway which leads to Helium is 50 miles to the south, murmured Sola half to herself. A swift boat might make it there in 3 hours, and then to Helium it is 500 miles, most of the way through thinly settled districts. They would know, they would follow us. We might hide among the great trees for a time, but chances are small are small indeed for escape. They'd follow us to the very streets of Helium, then they would take toll of life at every step. You don't know them. Bless you, Magnus. Is there no other way we might reach Helium? Can you not draw me a rough map of the country we must traverse, Deja Thoris? Yes, she replied, and taking a great diamond from her hair, she drew upon the marble floor the first map of Barsumian territory I had ever seen. It was crisscrossed in every direction with long, straight lines, sometimes running parallel and sometimes converging towards some great circle. The lines, she said, were waterways, the circles, cities, and one far to the northwest of us she pointed out as Helium. There were other cities closer, but she said she feared to enter many of them, as they were not all friendly toward Helium. Ooh, and then we see the marble map of Barsoomian territory, which we don't see yet, but we will see at the end of the book. Finally, after studying the map carefully in the moonlight which now flooded the room, I pointed out a waterway far to the north of us which seemed to lead to Helium. Does this not pierce your grandfather's territory? Yes, but it's 200 miles north of us. It's one of the waterways we crossed on the trip to Thark. They'd never suspect we'd try for that distant waterway. That's why we think it's the best route for escape. Solo agreed with me, and it was decided that we should leave Thark in the same night, just as quickly, in fact, as I could find and saddle my thoats. Solo was to ride one, and Deja Thoris and I the other, each of us carrying sufficient food and drink to last us for 2 days, since the animals could not be urged too rapidly for so long a distance. I directed Solo to proceed with Deja Thoris along one of the less frequented avenues to the southern boundary of the city, where I would overtake them with thoats as quickly as possible. Then, leaving them to gather what food, silks, and furs we were to need, I slipped quietly to the rear of the first floor and entered the courtyard, where our animals were moving restlessly about, as was their habit before settling down for the night. In the shadows of the buildings, and out beneath the radiance of the Martian moons, moved the great herd of thoats and zitidars, the latter grunting their low gutturals, and the former occasionally emitting the sharp squeal which denotes the almost habitual state of rage in which these creatures pass their existence. They were quieter now, owing to the absence of man, but as they scented me they became more restless, their hideous noise increased. It was risky business, this entering a paddock of thoats alone and at night, first because their increasing noisiness might warn the nearby warriors that something was amiss, and also because for the slightest cause, or for no cause at all, that some great bull thoat might take it upon himself to lead a charge upon me. Magnus has joined us, by the way. For those of you not looking at the screen, Magnus is here. He's a little lap lad. Having no desire to awaken their nasty tempers upon such a night as this, where so much depended upon the secrecy and dispatch, I hugged the shadows of the buildings, ready at an instant's warning to leap into the safety of a nearby door or window. Thus I moved silently to the great gates which opened upon the street at the back of the court. As I neared the exit, I called softly to my 2 own animals. How I thanked the kind Providence which had given me the foresight to win the love and confidence of these wild, dumb brutes, for presently, from the far side of the court, I saw 2 huge bulks forcing their way toward me through the surging mountains of flesh. They came quite close to me, rubbing their muzzles against my body and nosing for the bits of food it was always my practice to reward them with. Opening the gates, I ordered the 2 great beasts to pass out, and then slipping quietly after them, I closed the portal behind me. I did not saddle nor mount the animals there, but instead walked quietly in the shadows of the buildings toward an unfrequented avenue which led toward the point at which I had arranged to meet Deja Thoris and Sola. With the noiselessness of disembodied spirits, we moved stealthily upon the deserted streets, but not until we were within sight of the plain beyond the city that I commenced to breathe freely. I was sure that Sola and Deja Thoris would find no difficulty in reaching our rendezvous undetected, but with my great thoats I was not so sure for myself, as if it was quite unusual for warriors to leave the city after dark. In fact, there was no place for them to go within any but a long ride. I reached the appointed meeting place safely, but as Deja Thoris and Solo were not there, I led my animals into the entrance hall of one of the large buildings. Presuming that one of the other women of the same household may have come in to speak to Sola, and so delayed their departure, I could not feel any undue apprehension until nearly an hour had passed without a sign of them, and by the time another half-hour had crawled away, I was becoming filled with grave anxiety. Then there broke upon the stillness of the night the sound of an approaching party, which From the noise, I knew could be no fugitives creeping stealthily through Liberty. Soon the party was near me, and from the black shadows of my entranceway I perceived a score of mounted warriors who, in passing, dropped a dozen words that fetched my heart clean to the top of my head. He would likely have arranged to meet them with just without the city, and so I heard no more. They had passed on, but it was enough. Our plan had been discovered, and the chances from our escape from now on to the fearful end would be small indeed. My one hope now was to return undetected to the quarters of Deja Thoris and learn what fate had overtaken her. But how to do it with these great monstrous thoughts upon my hands, now that the city was probably aroused by the knowledge of my escape, was a problem of no mean proportion. Suddenly, an idea occurred to me, and acting on my knowledge of the construction of these buildings, of these ancient Martian cities, with a hollow court within the center of each square, I groped my way blindly through the dark chambers, calling the great thoats after me. They had difficulty in negotiating some of the doorways, but as the buildings fronting the city's principal exposures were all designed upon a magnificent scale, they were able to wriggle through without sticking fast. And thus we finally made the inner court, where I found, as I had expected, the usual carpet of moss-like vegetation, which would provide their food and drink till I could return them to their own enclosure. That they would be quiet and contented here as elsewhere I was confident, nor was there but the remotest possibility that they'd be discovered, as the green men had no desire to enter these outlying buildings, which were frequented by the only thing, I believe, which caused them the sensation of fear, the great white apes of Barsoom. Removing the saddle trappings, I hid them just within the rear doorway of the building through which we'd entered the court, and turning the beast loose, quickly made my way across the court, to the rear of the buildings upon the further side, and thence to the avenue beyond. Waiting in the doorway of the building, until I was assured that no one was approaching, I hurried across to the opposite side, and through the first doorway to the court beyond. Thus, crossing through court after court, with only the slight chance of detection, with the necessary crossing of avenues entailed, I made my way, in safety, to the courtyard in the rear of Deja Thoris's quarters. Here, of course, I found the beasts of the warriors who quartered in the adjacent buildings, and the warriors themselves I might expect to meet within if I entered, but fortunately for me I had another and safer method of reaching the upper story, where Deja Thoris should be found, and after first determining as nearly as possible which of the buildings she occupied, for I never observed them from the court side, I took advantage of my relatively great strength and agility, and sprang upward until I grasped the sill of a second-story window, which I thought to be in the rear of her apartment. Drawing myself inside the room, I moved stealthily toward the front of the building, and not until I had quite reached the doorway of her room was I made aware by voices that it was occupied. I did not rush headlong in, but listened without to assure myself it was indeed Deja Thoris, and that it was safe to venture within. It was well indeed that I took this precaution. Oh, sorry. Hiccups. Horrible night for them. It was well indeed that I took this precaution, for the conversation I heard was in the low gutturals of men, and the words which finally came to me proved a most timely warning. The speaker was a chieftain. He was giving orders to 4 of his warriors.
And when he returns to this chamber, as he surely will when he finds she does not meet him at the city's edge, you 4 are to spring upon him and disarm him. It will require the combined strength of all of you to do it, if the reports they bring back from Korad are correct. When you have him fast bound, bear him to the vaults beneath the Jadok's quarters, and chain him securely where he may be found when Tal Hajus wishes him. Allow him to speak with none, nor permit any other to enter this apartment before he comes. There will be no danger of the girl returning, for by this time she is safe in the arms of Tal Hajus, and may all her ancestors have pity upon her, for Tal Hajus will have none. The great Sarkoja has done a noble knight's work. I go. and if you fail to capture him when he comes, I commend your carcasses to the cold bosom of Is.
Alright, folks, we are uh troopers. Anyway, we are at a chapter boundary, and we're very close to when we normally have intermission. So I'm gonna call intermission here. We're gonna be right back. Hey, look there. The be right back text is up and everything. Well, we didn't have a starting soon this time. We're gonna be right back. I'm gonna grab some more water. Water for my inside guts. Very important, that water. It won't be more than 15 minutes. I'm still working on that timer. One of these days I'm gonna get it. But like I said, we will be right back. If you've been sitting along with me, stretch. Stand up and stretch, please. If you have been standing, unlike me, I might heartily suggest you sit for a moment. Get yourself some water. If you haven't had any water in the intervening 2 hours that we've been doing this, you probably need some, honestly. Pet your pets for me. Feel free to return to the Discord and post pictures of your pets while you're petting them for me. Take care of things around the house. Take any medications if you are so inclined and it is the right time for that. Like I said, we'll be back in no more than 15 minutes. Keep one eye on the stream. And don't antagonize the mod too bad. We'll be back with chapter 5, 6, 7, 17, A Costly Recapture. Okay. Let me just flip the camera back on. Allow you to observe Mr. Magnus, our most vital co-host. Other than, of course, Library Cat. He is so comfy. He is so cozy. I am loath to disturb him. So much so that I am going to maybe make myself another cup of tea. Such as to not disturb him. I don't know. I might have some water. Think about it. But I've gotten up. I've been about. I've availed myself with the night air. I had a little stretch. I also had a little cake. Check the Discord for cake. I am actively posting the cake in Discord right now. If you are a member of our fair Discord, sign on right now for some cake. Library, library, library. I need you to be patient, kitty. Ow! That's my arm you're stabbing.
Yeah, Dad, you need to tell the people about me too.
I know, I know. Use AOL keyword cake for cake. Is very much how I felt describing sign on to the Discord right now. Hi. You know, if you want pets, you gotta come sit on my lap. That's how it works while I'm reading. You know this.
No, I don't. I am very small.
Okay. Anyway, I have posted the cake. This is actually a really good cake. I modified a recipe for a Coca-Cola chocolate cake, and I made it into a vanilla cherry blossom cake through the power of cherry blossom LaCroix. Thank you, Jev, for posting the Discord link there. Okay, Magnus.
Excuse me, sir. I need to sit here.
Oh, yeah. Scooch booch. I know. I hope you all could hear that. I know, we're comfy. Dad is so mean to you. Oh, Dad is so mean to you. You know what? This thing's comfy. I want. Will you have both recipes in the Discord? I will send the original Yeah, I'll send the original recipe and the recipe for the cherry blossom one at their original scale. The picture I posted in Discord is for a 9x13 cake pan. These recipes were originally scaled for a 6-inch cake pan, which I have over my head here. Hang on. Ow! My knee almost said, no, you don't get to see the 6-inch cake pan. This is a 6-inch cake pan. It's like bachelor sized. But I got it because it fits in my air fryer. Because, shocker, air fryer is just small convection oven. But I will share those after stream. I don't know. I want to be comfy. Well, they don't fit in every air fryer in the world, but they fit in mine. They'll probably fit in a larger number of air fryers than one would think. Yeah, I've just been treating my air fryer as a tabletop convection oven. I've baked bread for a good part of the year in it, actually. And it's worked just fine. Yeah, I should share more recipes in Discord. I have a perfectly good bread recipe that I can apply some math to make it not sourdough. I've got pancakes, I've got waffles, I've got bagels, I've got pretzels, I got a donut recipe. I've got this cake recipe now. I've got brownies. Brownies, I think air fryers are a great idea. They are. They're a great little, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, they're the great little convenience, you know. It's much easier to warm up just a little air fryer than it is to lug the whole oven. One day, yeah. Honestly, this is not an endorsement. I wish they would endorse me. My air fryer is one of those instant pot air fryers where it's like it's an instant pot and then you can dunk a lid on top of it and it's an air fryer. That's really handy. Because I couldn't just get an instant pot. I'm in an RV. I don't have the space for both of those things. you know? But ooh, while we're distracted from the book, Jev has reminded me that the Codex exists. You see this little bug, this little logo above my head? It's not a bug. It used to be a bug. It used to be like a little patch-shaped bug. It's not a bug anymore. It's a logo. This Codex logo above my head and that Twitch team name underneath my screen, those point to the Codex, which is a group of reading streamers. We kind of all spread the gamut on genre. I kind of lean science fiction. There's a couple people who do author permission stuff so they can actually get out of the public domain. There's a couple people who do like fairy tales. There's somebody who does all their books in an ASMR voice. There's somebody who does like a lot of visual novels and like mobile. I don't want to say otome games. That's not what I'm thinking of. Like mobile, mobile visual novel type stuff. Very anime. A lot of light novels. There's somebody who does Japanese fairy tales. I think he's live right now, actually. But long story short, there are other read streamers. Go check out Codex for that. It's a separate Discord from mine. We do a book club once a month. I forgot to suggest a November book club book. I have some stuff I've been sitting on that I've been like, oh, this will be a good one. I'm very tempted to... He's playing a game at the moment. Oh. I just assume at this point everyone in the Codex when they are streaming is doing a book, which is clearly an obviously horrible assumption to make, because I only am streaming books half the time. What's he playing right now? I'm gonna look at the Codex Discord, just out of curiosity. He might be, because he tends to play like strategy games, like XCOM and the like. Oh, he's playing Warframe. Well, more power to you, buddy. I don't have the patience for Warframe. Honestly, the only loot shooter I've had any sort of anything resembling patience for was Borderlands, and that was a long time ago. Anyway, we've discussed the Codex here many a time. They're pretty great. They're good people. And if you can't tell, I do pay attention to what everybody else reads, partially out of a sense of I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but partially out of a sense of what do they find interesting, because it really informs the takes that we make in book club, I think, to see what we're reading. Like I said, we don't have a November book club. I'm hoping that we can get a big group together for a December book club that does another thing like we did with what's the title? Last year we did A Christmas Carol, which honestly, if we just do A Christmas Carol again, I think that'd be fun. But like if we can find another public domain Christmas story to do, like in a more radio play fashion, I'm here for it. That sounds really fun, and it's a great group project, and we should do more of it. Honestly, I'd love to pitch more group projects to the group, like pick out some Dimension X scripts or something, or pick up more old radio plays and be like, hey guys, what if we do this? Or a couple people have suggested group writing prompts. I have some fun writing prompts we could do as a group for sure. We need to do more group stuff, is my humble opinion on the matter. We do all this stuff, kind of separately and all point at the group, and then we don't do as much with the group as we should, in my humble opinion. I say as if I show up to half the group stuff. Usually they set the date for the book club while I am profoundly busy, but not this month and not next month, gosh dang it. But, it's a good group of people, is what I'm saying. If you like what I do here, you'll like what everybody else is doing, for sure. You might not like the books they're reading, but you'll like the general shape of what they're doing. Anyway, that's my spiel. That's my pitch. Let's sit down. Let's take a breath. Let's get into the right state of mind, shall we? And we will resume our tale with chapter 17, A Costly Recapture. As the speaker ceased, he turned to leave the apartment by the door where I was standing, but I needed to wait no longer. I had heard enough to fill my soul with dread, and stealing quietly away, I returned to the courtyard by the way I had come. My plan of action was formed upon the instant, and crossing the square and the bordering avenue upon the opposite side, I soon stood within the courtyard of Talhayus. The brilliantly lighted apartments of the first floor told me where first to seek, and advancing to the windows, I peered within. I soon discovered that my approach was not to be the easy thing I had hoped, for the rear rooms bordering the court were filled with warriors and women. I then glanced up at the stories above, discovering that the third was apparently unlighted, and so decided to make my entrance to the building from that point. It was the work of but a moment for me to reach the windows above, and soon I had drawn myself within the sheltering shadows of the unlighted third floor. Fortunately, the room I had selected was untenanted, and creeping noiselessly to the corridor beyond, I discovered a light in the apartments ahead of me. Reaching what appeared to be a doorway, I discovered that it was but an opening upon an immense inner chamber, which towered from the first floor 2 stories below me to the dome-like roof of the building, high above my head. The floor of this great circular hall was thronged with chieftains, warriors, and women, and at one end was a great raised platform, upon which squatted the most hideous beast I'd ever put my eyes upon. He had all the cold, hard, cruel, terrible features of the green warriors, but accentuated and debased by the animal passions to which he had given himself over for many years. There was not a mark of dignity or pride upon his bestial countenance, while his enormous bulk spread itself out upon the platform where he squatted like some huge devil-fish. His 6 limbs accentuated the similarity in a horrible and startling manner. But the sight that froze me with apprehension was that of Deja Thoris, and Sola standing there before him, the fiendish leer of him as he let his great protruding eyes gloat upon the lines of her beautiful figure. She was speaking, but I couldn't hear what was said, nor could I make out the low grumble of his reply. She stood there, erect before him, her head high held, and even at the distance I was from them, I could read the scorn and disgust upon her face, as she let her haughty glance rest without sign of fear upon him. She was indeed like the proud daughter of 1,000 Jadaks. Every inch of her dear, precious little body, so small, so frail beside the towering warriors around her, but in her majesty dwarfing them into insignificance. She was the mightiest figure among them, and I verily believe they felt it. Presently, Talhayus made a sign that the chamber be cleared, the prisoners be left alone before him. Slowly, the chieftains, warriors, and women melted away into the shadows of the surrounding chambers, and Deja Thoris and Sola stood alone before the Shadak of the Tharks. One chieftain alone had hesitated before departing. I saw him standing in the shadows of a mighty column, his fingers nervously toying with the hilt of his greatsword, and his cruel eyes bent in implacable hatred upon Talhayus. It was Tarkus, and I could read his thoughts as they were an open book for the undisguised loathing upon his face. He was thinking of that other woman who, 40 years ago, had stood before this beast, and could I have spoken a word into his ear at that moment, the reign of Talhayus would have been over. But finally he also strode from the room, not knowing that he left his own daughter at the mercy of the creature he most loathed. Talhayus arose, and I, half fearing, half anticipating his intentions, hurried to the winding runway which led to the floors below. No one was near to intercept me, and I reached the main floor of the chamber unobserved, taking my station in the shadow of the same column that Tarkas had but just deserted. As I reached the floor, Talhayus was speaking.
Princess of Helium, I might wring a mighty ransom from your people would I but return you to them unharmed. But 1,000 times would I rather watch that beautiful face writhe in the agonies of torture. It shall be long drawn out, that I promise you. 10 days of pleasure were all too short to show the love I harbor for your race. The terrors of your death shall haunt the slumbers of the red men through all ages to come. They will shudder in the shadows of the night as their fathers tell them of the awful vengeance of the green men, of the power and might and hate and cruelty of Talhayus. But before the torture you shall be mine for 1 short hour, and word of that too shall go forth to Tardos Moors, Yadok of Helium, your grandfather, that he may grovel upon the ground in the agonies of his sorrow. Tomorrow the torture will commence. Tonight thou art Talhayus's. Come.
He sprang down from the platform and grasped her roughly by the arm, but scarcely had he touched her than I leapt between them. My short sword, sharp and gleaming, was in my right hand. I could have plunged it into his putrid heart before he realized I was upon him, but as I raised my arm to strike, I thought of Tarkas, and with all my rage, with all my hatred, I could not rob him of that sweet moment for which he had lived and hoped for all these long, weary years, and so instead I swung my good right fist full upon the joint of his jaw. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor, as one dead. In the deathly silence that followed, I grasped Deja Thoris by the hand, and motioning Sola to follow, we sped noiselessly from the chamber and to the floor above. Unseen, we reached a rear window, and with the straps and leather of my trapping, I lowered first Sola, then Deja Thoris to the ground below. Dropping lightly after them, I drew them rapidly around the court in the shadows of the building, and thus we returned over the same course I had so recently followed from the distant boundary of the city. We finally came upon my thoats in the courtyard where I had left them, and placing the trappings upon them, we hastened through the building to the avenue beyond. Mounting, Sola upon one beast and Deja Thoris behind me upon the other, we rode from the city of Thark through the hills to the south. Instead of circling back around the city to the northwest and toward the nearest waterway, which lay so short a distance from us, we turned to the northeast and struck out upon the mossy waste, across which, for 200 dangerous and weary miles, lay another main artery leading to Helium. No word was spoken until we left the city far behind, but I could hear the quiet sobbing of Deja Thoris as she clung to me with her dear head resting against my shoulder.
If we make it, my chieftain, the debt of Helium will be a mighty one, greater than she can ever pay you. And should we not make it, the debt is no less, though Helium will never know, for you saved the last of our line from worse than death.
I did not answer, but instead reached to my side and pressed the little fingers of her I loved where they clung to me for support, and then, in unbroken silence, we sped over the yellow moonlit moss, each of us occupied with his own thoughts. For my part, I could not be other than joyful that I had tried, with Deja Thoris's warm body pressed close to mine, and with all our unsurpassed danger, my heart was singing as gaily as though we were already entering the gates of Helium. Our earlier plans had been so sadly upset that we now found ourselves without food or drink, and I alone was armed. We therefore urged our beasts to a speed that must tell on them sorely before we could hope to sight the ending of the first stage of our journey. We rode all night and all the following day with only a few short rests. On the second night, both we and our animals were completely flagged, and so we lay down upon the moss and slept for some 5 or 6 hours, taking up the journey once more before daylight. All the following day we rode, and when late in the afternoon we had sighted no distant trees, the mark of the great waterways throughout all Barsoom, the terrible truth had flashed upon us. We were lost. Evidently we'd circled, but which way it was difficult to say, nor did it seem possible with the sun to guide us by day and the moon and stars by night. At any rate, no waterway was in sight, and the entire party was almost ready to drop from hunger, thirst, and fatigue. Far ahead of us, and a trifle to the right, we could distinguish the outlines of some low mountains. These we decided to attempt to reach, in the hope that from some ridge we might discern the missing waterway. Night fell upon us before we reached our goal, and almost fainting from weariness and weakness, we lay down and slept. I awakened early in the morning by some huge body pressing close to mine, and opening my eyes with a start, I beheld my blessed old Woola snuggling close to me. The faithful brood had followed us across the trackless waste to share our fates, whatever it might be. Putting my arms about his neck, I pressed my cheek close to his, and nor am I ashamed that I did it, nor of the tears that came to my eyes as I thought of his love for me. Shortly after this, Deja Thoris and Sola awakened, and it was decided that we push on at once in effort to gain the hills. We had gone scarcely a mile when I noticed that my thoat was commencing to stumble and stagger in a most pitiful manner, although we had not attempted to force them out of a walk since about noon of the preceding day. Suddenly he lurched wildly to one side and pitched violently to the ground. Deja Thoris and I were thrown clear of him, and fell upon the soft moss was scarcely ajar, but the poor beast was in a pitiable condition, not even being able to rise, despite being relieved of our weight. Sola told me that the coolness of the night, when it fell, together with the rest, would doubtless revive him, so I decided not to kill him, as was my first intention, as I had thought it cruel to leave him alone there to die of hunger and thirst. Relieving him of his trappings, which I flung down beside him, we left the poor fellow to his fate, and instead pushed on with a one thoat as best we could. Sola and I walked, making Deja Thoris ride, much against her will. In this way we had progressed within a half a mile of the hills we were endeavouring to reach, when Deja Thoris, from her point of vantage upon the thoat, cried out when she saw a great party of mounted men filing down a pass in the hills several miles away. Sola and I both looked in the direction she indicated, and there, plainly discernible, were several hundred mounted warriors. They seemed to be headed in a southwesterly direction, which would take them away from us. They doubtless were Thark warriors who had been sent out to capture us. We breathed a great sigh of relief that they were traveling in the opposite direction. Quickly lifting Deja Thoris from the thoat, I commanded the animal to lie down, and we three did the same, presenting as small an object as possible, for fear of attracting the attention of the warriors toward us. We could see them as they filed out of the pass, just for an instant, before they were lost to a view behind a friendly ridge. To us a most providential ridge, since, had they been in view for any great length of time, they scarcely could have failed to discover us. As what proved to be the last warrior came into view from the pass, he halted, and to our consternation, threw his small but powerful field glass to his eye, and scanned the sea bottom in all directions. Evidently he was a chieftain, for in certain marching formations among the green men, a chieftain brings up the extreme rear of the column. As his glass swung toward us, our hearts stopped in our breasts, and we could feel the cold sweat starting from every pore in my body. Presently it swung full upon us and stopped. The tension of our nerves was near the breaking point, and I doubt if any of us breathed for the few moments he held us covered by his glass. Then he lowered it, and we could see him shout a command to the warriors who passed from our sight behind the ridge. He did not wait for them to join him, however. Instead, he wheeled his thoat and came tearing madly in our direction. There was but one slight chance, and that was what we must take quickly. Raising my strange Martian rifle to my shoulder, I sighted and touched the button which controlled the trigger. There was a sharp explosion as the missile reached its goal, and the charging chieftain pitched backward from his flying mount. Springing to my feet, I urged the thoat to rise, and directed Sola to take Deja Thoris with her upon him, and make a mighty effort to reach the hills before the green warriors were upon us. I knew that in the ravines and the gullies they might find a temporary hiding place, and even though they died there of hunger and thirst, it would be so better than that they fell into the hands of the Tharks. forcing my 2 revolvers upon them as a slight means of protection, and as a last resort, as an escape for themselves from the horrid death which would recapture certainly mean, I lifted Deja Thoris in my arms and placed her upon the thoat behind Sola, who had already mounted at my command. Goodbye, my princess. May we meet in Helium yet. I have escaped from worse plights than this. And I tried to smile as I lied.
What? Are you not coming with us?
Why, how may I, Deja Thoris? Someone must hold these fellas off for a while, and I can better escape 'em alone than the 3 of us could together. She sprang quickly from the thoat, and throwing her dear arms about my neck, turned to Sola, saying with quiet dignity,
Fly, Sola. Deja Thoris remains to die with the man she loves.
Those words are engraved upon my heart. Oh, gladly would I give up my life 1,000 times could I only hear them once again. But I could not then give even a second to the rapture of her sweet embrace, and pressing my lips to hers for the first time, I picked her up bodily and tossed her to the seat behind Sola again, commanding the latter in peremptory tones to hold her there by force, and then slapping the thoat upon the flank, I saw them borne away, Deja Thoris struggling to the last to free herself from Sola's grasp. Turning, I beheld the green warriors mounting the ridge and looking for their chieftain. In a moment they saw him, and then me, but scarcely had they discovered me than I had commenced firing, lying flat upon my belly in the moss. I had an even 100 rounds in the magazine of my rifle, and another 100 in the belt at my back, and I kept up a continuous stream of fire till I saw all the warriors who had been first to return from behind the ridge either dead or scurrying to cover. My respite was short-lived, however, for soon the entire party, numbering some 1,000 men, came charging into view, racing madly toward me. I fired until my rifle was empty. They were almost upon me. Then a glance showing me that Deja Thoris and Sola had disappeared among the hills, I sprang up, throwing away my useless gun, and started away in the direction opposite to that taken by Sola and her charge. If ever Martians had an expedition of jumping, it was granted those astonished warriors on that day long years ago. But while it led them away from Deja Thoris, it did not distract their attention from endeavoring to capture me. They raced wildly after me, until finally my foot struck a projecting piece of quartz, and down I went sprawling upon the moss. As I looked up, they were upon me, and though I drew my long sword in an attempt to sell my life as dearly as possible, it was soon over. I reeled beneath their blows, which fell upon me in perfect torrents. My head swam, all was black, and I went down beneath them to oblivion. Chapter 18. Chained in Warhoon. It must have been several hours before I regained consciousness, and I well remember the feeling of surprise which swept over me as I realized I was not dead. I was lying among a pile of sleeping silks and furs in the corner of a small room in which there were several green warriors, and bending over me was an ancient and ugly female. As I opened my eyes, she turned to one of the warriors, saying,
He will live, O Yed.
"'Tis well," replied the one so addressed, rising and approaching my couch.
He should render rare sport for the games.
And now as my eyes fell upon him, I saw that he was no Thark, for his ornaments and metal were not that of a horde. He was a huge fellow, terribly scarred about the face and chest, with one broken tusk and a missing ear. Strapped on either breast were human skulls, and, depending from these, were a number of dried human hands. His reference to the great games of which I had heard so much while among the Tharks convinced me that I had jumped from purgatory into Gehenna. After a few more words with the female, during which she assured him that I was now fully fit to travel, the Yed ordered that we mount and ride after the main column. I was strapped securely to as wild and unmanageable as a thoat I had ever seen, and with a mounted warrior on either side to prevent the beast from bolting, we rode forth at a furious pace in pursuit of the column. My wounds gave me but little pain, so wonderfully and rapidly had the applications and interjections of the female exercised their therapeutic powders. Therapeutic powders, rather. Powers. There's no D there. So wonderfully and rapidly had the applications and injections of the female exercised their therapeutic powers, and so deftly had she bound and plastered the injuries. Just before dark, we reached the main body of troops, shortly after they had made camp for the night. I was immediately taken before the leader, who proved to be the Jadak of the hordes of Wahoon. Like the Yed who had brought me, he was frightfully scarred, and also decorated with a breastplate of human skulls and dried dead hands, which seemed to mark all the greater warriors among the Wahoons, as well as to indicate their awful ferocity, which greatly transcends even that of the Tharks. The Jadak, Bar Komas, who was comparatively young, was the object of the fierce and jealous hatred of his old lieutenant, Dakova, the Yed who had captured me, and I could not but note the almost studied efforts which the latter made to affront his superior. Bless you, Magnus. You have any more sneezes for the class, or just the one? Just the one, okay. He entirely omitted the usual formal salutation as we entered the presence of the Yadak, and as he pushed me roughly before the ruler, he exclaimed, in a loud and menacing voice,
I have brought a strange creature wearing the medal of a Thark, whom it is my pleasure to have battle with a wild thoat at the great games.
He will die at Bar Kombos, your Yadak sees fit, if at all. He will die as Bar Kombos, your Yadak sees fit, if at all, replied the young ruler with emphasis and dignity.
If at all? Ha ha! By the dead hands at my throat he shall die, Barkamas. No maudlin weakness on your part shall save him. Oh, would that Wahoon were ruled by a real Jadak, rather than a water-hearted weakling from whom even old Dakova would tear the metal with his bare hands.
Barkamas eyed the defiant and insubordinate chieftain for an instant. His expression of yeah, me too, Magnus. Shake. Barkamas eyed the defiant and insubordinate Barkamas eyed the defiant and insubordinate chieftain for an instant, his expression one of haughty, fearless contempt and hate. Then, without drawing a weapon, without uttering a word, he hurled himself at the throat of his defamer. I had never seen two green Martian warriors battle with nature's weapon. The exhibition of animal ferocity which ensued was as fearful a thing as the most disordered imagination could picture. They tore at each other's eyes and ears with their hands, with their gleaming tusks repeatedly slashed and gored, till both were cut fairly to ribbons from head to foot. Barkamas had the much better of the battle, as he was stronger, quicker, and more intelligent. It soon seemed that the encounter was done, saving only the final death thrust when Barkamas slipped in breaking away from a cinch. It was the one little opening that Dakova needed, and hurling himself at the body of his adversary, he buried his single mighty tusk in Barkamas's groin. With a last powerful effort, ripped the young Yadak wide open the full length of his body, the great tusk finally wedging in the bones of Barkamas's jaw. Victor and vanquished rolled limp and lifeless upon the moss, a huge mass of torn and bloody flesh. Barkamas was stone dead, and only the most Herculean efforts on the part of Dakova's female saved him from the fate he deserved. 3 days later he walked without assistance to the body of Barkamas, which, by custom, had not been moved from where it fell, and placing his foot upon the neck of his erstwhile ruler, he assumed the title of Jadak of Wahoon. The dead Yadak's hands and head were removed to be added to the ornaments of his conqueror, and his women cremated what remained amid wild and terrible laughter. The injuries to Dakova had delayed the march so greatly it was decided to give up the expedition, which was a raid upon a small Thark community in retaliation for the destruction of the incubator, until after the Great Games, and the entire body of warriors, 10,000 in number, turned back toward Warhoon. My introduction to these cruel and bloodthirsty people was but an index to the scenes I witnessed almost daily while with them. They were a smaller horde than the Tharks, but much more ferocious. Not a day passed but that some members of the various Warhoon communities met in deadly combat. I've seen as high as 8 mortal duels within a single day. 8 duels in a single day, that's a lot. We reached the city of Warhoon after some 3 days' march. I was immediately cast into a dungeon and heavily chained to the floor and walls. Food was brought to me at intervals, but owing to the utter darkness of the place, I know whether I lay these days, or weeks, or months. It was the most horrible experience of all my life, and that my mind did not give way to the terrors of that inky blackness has been a wonder to me ever since. The place was filled with creeping, crawling things. Cold, sinuous bodies passed over me when I lie down, and in the darkness I occasionally caught glimpses of their gleaming, fiery eyes, fixed in horrible intentness upon me. No sound reached me from the world above, and no word would my jailer vouchsafe when my food was brought to me, although I at first bombarded him with questions. Finally, all the hatred and maniacal loathing for these awful creatures who had placed me in this horrible place was centered by my tottering reason upon this single emissary who represented to me the entire horde of Warhoons. I had noticed that he always advanced with his dim torch to where he could place the food within my reach, and as he stooped to place it upon the floor, his head was about on a level with my breast. So with the cunning of a madman, I backed into the far corner of my cell when I next heard him approaching, and gathering a little slack of the great chain which held me in my hand, I waited his coming, crouching like some beast of prey. As he stooped to place my food upon the ground, I swung the chain above my head and crashed the links with all my strength upon his skull. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor, stone dead. Laughing and chattering like the idiot I was fast becoming, I fell upon his prostrate form, my fingers feeling for his dead throat. Presently they came in contact with a small chain, at the end of which dangled a number of keys. The touch of my fingers on these keys brought back my reason with the suddenness of thought. No longer was I a gibbering idiot, but a sane, reasoning man with the means of escape within my very hands. As I was groping to remove the chain from about my victim's neck, I glanced up into the darkness to see 6 pairs of gleaming eyes fixed, unwinking, upon me. Slowly they approached, and slowly I shrank back from the awful horror of them. Back into my corner I crouched, holding my hands palms out before me, and stealthily on came the awful eyes, until they reached the dead body at my feet. Then slowly they retreated, but this time with a strange grating sound, and finally they disappeared in some black and distant recess of my dungeon. Chapter 19. Battling in the Arena. Slowly I regained my composure, and finally essayed again to attempt to remove the keys from the dead body of my former jailer. But as I reached out into the darkness to locate it, I found to my horror that it was gone. Then the truth flashed on me. The owners of those gleaming eyes had dragged my prize away from me to be devoured in their neighboring lair, as they'd been waiting for days, for weeks, for months, through all this awful eternity of my imprisonment, to drag my dead carcass to their feast. For 2 days no new food was brought me, but then a new messenger appeared, and my incarceration went on as before, but not again did I allow my reason to be submerged by the horror of my position. Shortly after this episode, another prisoner was brought in and chained near me. By the dim torchlight I saw that he was a red Martian, and I could scarcely await the departure of his guards to address him. As their retreating footsteps died away in the distance, I called out softly the Martian word of greeting, Kaur.
Who are you who speaks out of the darkness?
He answered. I am John Carter, friend of the Red Men of Helium.
I am of Helium, but I do not recall your name.
And then I told him my story as I've written it here, omitting only any reference to my love for Deja Thoris. He was much excited by the news of Helium's princess, and seemed quite positive that she and Solo could easily have reached a point of safety from where they left me. He said that he knew the place well because the defile through which the Warhoon warriors had passed when they discovered us was the only one ever used by them when marching to the south.
Deja Thoris and Sola entered the hills not 5 miles from here, from a great waterway, and are now probably quite safe,
he assured me. My fellow prisoner was Kantos Khan, a Padwar lieutenant in the Navy. In the Navy of Helium. He had been a member of the ill-fated expedition which had fallen into the hands of the Tharks at the time of Deja Thoris' capture, and he briefly related the events which followed the defeat of the battleships. Badly injured, and only partially manned, they limped slowly toward Helium, but while passing near the city of Zodanga, the capital of Helium's hereditary enemies among the Red Men of Barsoom, they had been attacked by a great body of war vessels, and all but the craft to which Kantos Khan belonged were either destroyed or captured. His vessel was chased for days by 3 of the Zodangan warships, but finally escaped during the darkness of a moonless night. 30 days after the capture of Deja Thoris, or about the time of our coming to Thark, his vessel had reached Helium with about 10 survivors of the original crew of 700 officers and men. Immediately, 7 great fleets, each of 100 mighty warships, had been dispatched to search for Deja Thoris, and from these vessels 2,000 smaller craft had been kept out continuously in
Oh no.
And from these vessels 2,000 smaller craft had been kept out continuously in hiccups. Okay, instead of holding my breath for 60 seconds, I'm gonna drink of some water. Oh, me too, Magnus. Achoo. Oh. Okay, hopefully that has deleted the hiccups. Where were we? Immediately, 7 great fleets, each of 100 mighty warships, had been dispatched to search for Deja Thoris, and from these vessels 2,000 smaller craft had been kept out continuously in a futile search for the missing princess. 2 green Martian communities had been wiped off the face of Barsoom by the avenging fleets, but no trace of Deja Thoris had been found. They had been searching among the northern hordes, and only within the past few days had they extended their quest to the south. No, don't install the hiccups! Delete the hiccups! No! Yes, jacket. I felt like being read. I came back in and Magnus was very, very snug on top of the jacket, and I went, you know what? Magnus is wearing a cute little red shirt. I will wear cute jacket. Control delete hiccups. Anyway, Kantos Khan had been detailed to one of the small one-man flyers and had had the misfortune to be discovered by the Warhoons while exploring their city. The bravery and daring of the man won my greatest respect and admiration. Alone had he landed at the city's boundary, and on foot he had penetrated to the buildings surrounding the plaza. For 2 days and 2 nights... Why can't I turn the page tonight? What the heck? For 2 days and 2 nights he had explored their quarters and their dungeons in search of his beloved princess, only to fall into the hands of a party of Warhoons as he was about to leave, after assuring himself that Deja Thoris was not a captive there. During the period of our incarceration, Kantos Khan and I became well acquainted and formed a warm, personal friendship. A few days only elapsed, however, before we were dragged forth from our dungeon for the great games. We were conducted early one morning to an enormous amphitheater, which instead of having been built upon the surface of the ground, was excavated below the surface. It had partially filled with debris, so that how large it had originally been was difficult to say. In its present condition, it held the entire 20,000 Warhoons of assembled hordes. The arena was immense, but extremely uneven and unkempt. Around it, the Wahoons had piled building stone from some of the ruined edifices of the ancient city to prevent the animals and the captives from escaping into the audience, and at each end had been constructed cages to hold them until their turns came to meet some horrible death upon the arena. Kantos Khan and I were confined together in one of the cages. In the others were wild Kalos, Thoats, mad Zididars, green warriors, women of other hordes, and many strange and ferocious wild beasts of Barsoom of which I had never before seen. The din of their roaring, growling, and squealing was deafening, and the formidable appearance of any one of them was enough to make the stoutest heart feel grave forebodings. Kantos Khan explained to me that at the end of the day, one of these prisoners would gain their freedom, and the others would lie dead about the arena. The winners in the various contests of the day would be pitted against each other until only two remained alive, the victor in the last encounter being set free, whether it was an animal or a man. The following morning, the cages would be filled with a new consignment of victim, and so on throughout the 10 days of the games. Shortly after we'd been caged, the amphitheater began to fill, and within an hour every available part of the seating space was occupied. Dak Kova, with his Yeds and chieftains, sat at the center of one side of the arena upon a large raised platform. At a signal from Dak Kova, the doors of 2 cages were thrown open, and a dozen green Martian females were driven to the center of the arena. Each was given a dagger, and then, at the far end, a pack of 12 Kalos, or wild dogs, were loosed upon them. As the brutes, growling and foaming, rushed upon the almost defenseless women, I turned my head that I might not see the horrid sight. The yells and laughter of the green horde bore witness to the excellent quality of the sport. When I turned back to the arena, as Kantos Khan had told me, it was over. I saw three victorious Kalotes, snarling and growling over the bodies of their prey. The women had given a good account of themselves. Next, a mad Zididar was loosed among the remaining dogs, and so on it went throughout the long, hot, horrible day. During the day I was pitted against first men and then beasts, but as I was armed with a long sword and always outclassed my adversary in agility and generally in strength as well, it proved but child's play to me. Time and time again I won the applause of the bloodthirsty multitude, and toward the end there were cries that I be taken from the arena and made a member of the hordes of Warhoon. Finally, there were but 3 of us left, a great green warrior of some far northern horde, Kantos Khan, and myself. The other 2 were to battle, and I to fight the conqueror for the final liberty, which was accorded the winner. Kantos Khan had fought several times during the day, and like myself had always proven victorious, but occasionally by the smallest of margins, especially when pitted against the green warriors. I had little hope that he could best his giant adversary, who had mowed down all before him during the day. The fellow towered nearly 16 feet in height, while Kantos Khan was some inches under 6 feet. As they advanced to meet one another, I saw for the first time a trick of Martian swordsmanship which centered Kantos Khan's every hope of victory in life on one cast of the dice, for as he came to within about 20 feet of the huge fellow, he threw his sword arm far behind him over his shoulder, with a mighty sweep hurled his weapon point foremost at the green warrior. It flew true as an arrow, and piercing the poor devil's heart, laid him dead upon the arena. That is a real sword technique. That has been that's not just Martian. That's an earthly sword technique. It is a massive gamble as described, but uh it has been notated in fencing and sword fighting folios in from the period in which swords were most popular. There's a Italian one called The Flower of Battle that literally depicts someone doing that, like essentially just spearing their sword at somebody. It's a massive gamble. If you miss, you're done for. And if there's anyone nearby and you can't pick up a weapon fast enough, you're also done for. But you can do it. Anyway, Kantos Khan and I were now pitted against each other, but as we approached the encounter, I whispered to him to prolong the battle until nearly dark, in the hope that we might find some means of escape. The horde evidently guessed that we had no hearts to fight each other, and so they howled in rage as neither of us placed a fatal thrust. Just as I saw the sudden coming of dark, I whispered to Kantos Khan to thrust his sword between my left arm and my body. As he did so, I staggered back, clasping the sword tightly with my arm, and thus fell to the ground with his weapon apparently protruding from my chest. Kantos Khan perceived my coup, and stepping quickly to my side, he placed his foot upon my neck, and withdrawing his sword from my body, gave me the final death blow through the neck, which is supposed to sever the jugular vein, but in this instance the cold blade slipped harmlessly in the sand of the arena. In the darkness which had now fallen, none could tell but that he had really finished me. I whispered to him to go and claim his freedom, then look for me in the hills east of the city, and so he left me. When the amphitheater had cleared, I crept stealthily to the top, and the great excavation lay far from the plaza, in an untenanted portion of the great dead city. I had little trouble in reaching those hills beyond. I really liked that. Like, the further I get into this book, the more perplexed I am that Disney flubbed this movie. You can really see how you would lay out a script for a film for this as you're reading it. It's a really well-paced, really well-written story. That's what really boggles my noggin. Burroughs has written an sheerly incredible volume of work. I was looking earlier today. He's published like more than 30 books in total. He was a prolific writer. He wrote like the entire Tarzan series, which is at least 10 books off the top of my head, and he wrote this entire series, which is another 10 books, and he was constantly publishing in the pulps of the time, like the science fiction magazines. This man was writing constantly. And he was a real marketer, too. Apparently, in the time that these were being released, like, Tarzan and John Carter were, like, MCU-level marketed characters. They were everywhere. Which I guess kind of stands to reason why we still know about Tarzan and why we sort of still know about John Carter. They were really well known in their time. And I can tell why. I'm not going to get around to Tarzan. It's going to be a billion years before I get to Tarzan. But I might look up more Edgar Rice Burroughs books. I really like this guy's writing style. It's very, very Sword and Planet. And longtime listeners know I am the biggest sucker for Sword and Planet. So before we dive into chapter 20, I want to see how many chapters we have left. We have 25, 6, 7, 8. So I say we finish this one and then leave the next 8 chapters for tomorrow, or for next week. I think that sounds like a plan. Let's have a little more water and dive into the last chapter for the night, chapter 20. In the Atmosphere Factory. For 2 days I waited there for Kantos Khan, but as he did not come, I started off on foot in a northwesterly direction, toward a point where he had told me lay the nearest waterway. My only food consisted of vegetable milk from the plants which gave so bounteously of this priceless fluid. Through 2 long weeks I wandered, stumbling through the nights guided only by the stars, and hiding during the days behind some protruding rock or occasionally some hills that I traversed. Several times I was attacked by wild beasts, strange, uncouth monstrosities that leapt upon me in the dark, so that I had ever to grasp my long sword in my hand, that I might be ready for them. Usually my strange, newly acquired telepathic power warned me in ample time, but once I was down with vicious fangs at my jugular, and a hairy face pressed close to mine before I knew that I was even threatened. What manner of thing was upon me I did not know, but that it was large and heavy and many-legged I could feel. My hands were at its throat before the fangs had a chance to bury themselves in my neck, and slowly I forced the hairy face from me and closed my fingers vice-like upon its windpipe. Without sound we lay there, the beast exerting every effort to reach me with those awful fangs, and I straining to maintain my grip and choke the life from it as I kept it from my throat. Slowly my arms gave to the unequal struggle, and inch by inch the burning eyes and gleaming tusks of my antagonist crept toward me, until the hairy face touched mine again, and I realized that all was over. And then a living mass of destruction sprang from the surrounding darkness full upon the creature that held me pinioned to the ground. The two rolled, growling upon the moss, tearing and rending one another in a frightful manner, but it was soon over, and my preserver stood with a lowered head above the throat of the dead thing which would have killed me. The nearer moon, hurtling suddenly above the horizon, and lighting up the Barsoomian scene, showed me that my preserver was Woola, but from whence he had come, or how he had found me, I was at a loss to know. That I was glad of his companionship, it's needless to say, but my pleasure at seeing him was tempered by anxiety as to the reason of his leaving Deja Thoris. Only her death, I felt sure, could account for his absence from her, so faithful I knew him to be to my commands. By the light of the now brilliant moons, I saw that he was but a shadow of his former self, as he turned from my caress, and commenced greedily to devour the dead carcass at my feet. I realized the poor fellow was more than half starved. I myself was in but little better plight, but I could not bring myself to eat the uncooked flesh, and I had no means of making a fire. When Woola had finished his meal, I again took up my weary and seemingly endless wandering in quest of the elusive waterway. At daybreak of the 15th day of my search, I was overjoyed to see the high trees that denoted the object of my search. About noon I dragged myself wearily to the portals of a huge building, which covered perhaps 4 square miles, and towered 200 feet in the air. It showed no aperture in the mighty walls, other than the tiny door at which I sank, exhausted, nor was there any sign of life in it. I could find no bell or other method of making my presence known to the inmates of the place, unless a small round hole in the wall near the door was for that purpose. It was about the bigness of a lead pencil, and thinking that it might be in the nature of a speaking tube, I put my mouth to it, was about to call into it, when a voice issued from it, asking me whom I might be, where from, the nature of my errands. I explained that I had escaped from the Warhoons and was dying of starvation and exhaustion. You wear the metal of a green warrior. You're followed by a Kalo, yet you're of the figure of a red man. In color you're neither green nor red. In the name of the 9th Ray, what creature are you? I'm a friend of the red man of Barsoom. I'm starving. In the name of humanity, open to me. Presently, the door commenced to recede before me until it had sunk into the wall 50 feet. Then it stopped and slid easily to the left, exposing a short, narrow corridor of concrete, at the further end of which was another door, similar in every respect to the one I had just passed. No one was in sight, yet immediately, as we passed the first door, it slid gently into place behind us, and receded rapidly to its original position in the front wall of the building. As the door had slipped aside, I noticed its great thickness, fully 20 feet, and as it reached its place once more after closing behind us, great cylinders of steel had dropped from the ceiling behind it and lifted their lower ends into apertures, countersunk in the floor. A second and third door receded before me and slipped to one side as the first, before I reached a large inner chamber, where I found food and drink set out upon a great stone table. A voice directed me to satisfy my hunger and to feed my calo, and while I was thus engaged by my invisible host, they put me through a severe and searching cross-examination. "Your statements are the most remarkable," said the voice on concluding its questioning, "but you're evidently speaking the truth, and it's equally evident that you're not of Barsoom. I can tell that by the conformation of your brain and the strange location of internal organs and the shape and size of your heart." Can you see? He's so startled he loses his accent. "Can you see through me?" "Yes, I can see all but your thoughts, and where you are Barsoomian, I could read those too." Then a door opened at the far side of the chamber, and a strange, dried-up little mummy of a man came toward me. He wore but a single article of clothing or adornment, a small collar of gold, which depended upon his chest, a great ornament as large as a dinner plate, set solid with huge diamonds, except for the exact center, which was occupied by a strange stone, an inch in diameter, that scintillated 9 different and distinct rays, the 7 colors of our earthly prism, and 2 beautiful rays which to me were new and nameless. I cannot describe them to you any more than you could describe red to a blind man. I only knew that they were beautiful in the extreme. The old man sat and talked with me for hours, and the strangest part of our intercourse was that I could read his every thought, while he couldn't fathom an iota from my mind unless I spoke. There's another picture that's a little gift for the people who stick around to the end of the book. I did not apprise him of my ability to sense his mental operations, and thus I learned a great deal which proved of immense value to me later, which I would never have known had he suspected my strange power. For the Martians have such perfect control of their mental machinery, they are able to direct their thoughts with absolute precision. The building in which I found myself contained the machinery which produces that artificial atmosphere which sustains life on Mars. The secret of the entire process hinges on the use of that 9th ray, one of the beautiful scintillations which I'd noted emanating from the great stone in my host's diadem. Diadem? Diadem? I think it's diadem. I've heard people pronounce it diadem. That's a fantasy way of describing a large amulet that is a necklace. I'm sure it has a more precise definition than that, but that's how I've always read it. Anyway, this ray is separated from the other rays of the sun by means of finely adjusted instruments placed upon the roof of the huge building, 3/4 of which is used for reservoirs in which the 9th ray is stored. This product is then treated electrically, or rather, certain proportions of refined electric vibrations are incorporated with it, and the result is then pumped to the 5 principal air centers of the planet, where, as it is released, contact with the ether of space transforms it into atmosphere. There is always sufficient reserve of the 9th ray stored in the great building to maintain the present Martian atmosphere for 1,000 years, and the only fear, as my new friend told me, was that some accident might befall the pumping apparatus. He led me to an inner chamber where I beheld a battery of 20 radium pumps, any one of which was equal to the task of furnishing all Mars with the atmospheric compound. For 800 years, he told me, he'd watched these pumps, which are used alternately a day each at a stretch, or a little over 24 1/2 Earth hours. He has one assistant who divides the watch with him. Half a Martian year, about 344 of our days, each of these men spend alone in this huge, isolated plant. So this thing is a massive, nuclear-powered atmosphere generator? So, let's wave aside the 9th ray nonsense. That's just like dated. That's really cool. It's a much better take on extra colors than the color of space ever did. So this thing takes in sunlight. Probably in a modern context we would go, oh yeah, it takes in sunlight to feed the plants. And then it uses nuclear-powered pumps to pump the atmosphere throughout the planet. That's so cool. This is such cool world building. Oh, I could yell about how cool the world building in this book is for hours, and I'm not going to because we need to read. Every red Martian is taught during the earliest childhood the principles of the manufacture of the atmosphere, but Only two at one time ever hold the secret of ingress to the great building, which, built as it is, with walls 150 feet thick, is absolutely unassailable, even the roof being guarded from assault by aircraft by glass covering 5 feet thick. The only fear they entertain of attack is from the green Martians or some demented red man. As all Barsoomians realize, the very existence of every form of life on Mars is dependent upon the uninterrupted working of this plant. One curious fact I discovered as I watched his thoughts was that the outer doors are manipulated by telepathic means. The locks are so finely adjusted that the doors are released by the action of a certain combination of thought waves. To experiment with my newfound toy, I thought to surprise him into revealing this conversation, so I asked him in a casual manner how he managed to unlock the massive doors for me from the inner chambers of the building. As quick as a flash, there leaped to his mind 9 Martian sounds, but as quickly faded, as he answered that this was a secret he must not divulge. From then on, his manner toward me changed, as though he feared that he had been surprised into divulging his great secret, and I read suspicion and fear in his looks and his thoughts, though his words were still fair. Before I retired for the night, he promised to give me a letter to the nearby agricultural officer, who would help me on my way to Zodanga, which he said was the nearest Martian city. But be sure that you do not let them know you are bound for Helium. They are at war with that country. My assistant and I are of no country. We belong to all Barsoom, and this talisman which we wear protects us in all lands, even among the green men, though we do not trust ourselves to their hands if we can avoid it. And so good night, my friend. May you have a long and restful sleep. Yes, a long sleep. And though he smiled pleasantly, I saw in his thoughts the wish that he had never admitted me, then a picture of him standing over me in the night, and the swift thrust of a long dagger, and the half-formed words, "I'm sorry, but it is for the best good of Barsoom." As he closed the door of my chamber behind him, his thoughts were cut off from me, as was the sight of him, which seemed strange to me in my little knowledge of thought transference. What was I to do? How could I escape through these mighty walls? Easily I could kill him, now that I was warned, but once he was dead, I would have no more escape, and with the stopping of the machinery of the great plant, I should die with all the other inhabitants of the planet. All, even Deja Thoris, were she not already dead. For the others I did not give the snap of my finger. The thought of Deja Thoris drove from my mind all desire to kill my mistaken host. Cautiously, I opened the door of my apartment, and, followed by Woola, sought the inner of the great doors. A wild scheme had come to me. I would attempt to force the great locks by the 9 thought waves I had read in my host's mind. Creeping stealthily through corridor after corridor, and down winding runways which turned hither and thither, I finally reached the great hall in which I had broken my long fast this morning. Nowhere had I seen my host, nor did I know where he kept himself by night. I was on the point of stepping boldly out into the room when a slight noise behind me warned me back into the shadows of a recess in the corridor. Dragging Woola after me, I crouched low in the darkness. Presently the old man passed close by me, and as he entered the dimly lighted chamber which I had been about to pass through, I saw that he held a long, thin dagger in his hand, that he was sharpening it upon a stone. In his mind was the decision to inspect the radium pumps, which would take about 30 minutes, and then return to my bedchamber and finish me. As he passed through the great hall and disappeared down the runway which led to the pump room, I stole stealthily from my hiding place and crossed to the great door, the inner of the 3, which stood between me and liberty. Concentrating my mind upon the massive lock, I hurled the 9 thought waves against it. In breathless expectancy I waited, when finally the great door moved softly toward me, then slid quietly to one side. One after the other, the remaining mighty portals opened at my command, and Woola and I stepped forth into the darkness, free, but little better off than we'd been before, other than we had full stomachs. Hastening away from the shadows of the formidable pile, I made for the first crossroad, intending to strike the central turnpike as quickly as possible. This I reached about morning, and entering the first enclosure I came to, I searched for some evidences of a habitation. There were low, rambling buildings of concrete, barred with heavy, impassable doors, and no amount of hammering and hello-ing brought any response. Weary and exhausting from sleeplessness, I threw myself upon the ground, commanding Woola to stand guard. Some time later, I was awakened by his frightful growlings, and opened my eyes to see 3 red Martians standing a short distance from us and covering me with their rifles. I am unarmed and no enemy, I hastened to explain. I've been a prisoner among the Green Men. I'm on my way to Zidanga. All I ask is food and rest for myself and my Kalo, and proper directions for reaching my destination. They lowered their rifles and advanced pleasantly toward me, placing their right hands upon my left shoulder, after the manner of their custom of salute, and asking me many questions about myself and my wanderings. Then they took me to the house of one of them, which was only a short distance away. The buildings I had been hammering at in the early morning were occupied only by stock and farm produce, the house proper standing among a grove of enormous trees, and, like all red Martian homes, had been raised at night some 40 or 50 feet from the ground on a large, round metal shaft which slid up or down a sleeve sunk in the ground. It was operated by a tiny radium engine in the entrance hall of the building. Instead of bothering with bolts and bars for their dwellings, the red Martians simply run them up out of harm's way during the night. They also have private means for lowering or raising them from the ground without, if they wish to go away and leave them. These brothers, with their wives and children, occupied 3 similar houses on the farm. They did no work themselves, being government officers in charge. The labor was performed by convicts, prisoners of war, delinquent debtors, and confirmed bachelors who were too poor to pay off the high celibate tax which all red Martian governments impose. They were the personification of cordiality and hospitality, and I spent several days with them, resting and recuperating from my long and arduous experiences. When they heard my story, I omitted all reference to Deja Thoris and the old man of the atmosphere plant. They advised me to color my body to more nearly resemble their own race, and then attempt to find employment in Zidanga, either in the army or the navy. The chances are small that your tale will be believed after you have proven your trustworthiness and won friends among the higher nobles of the court. This you can most easily do through military service, as we are a warlike people on Barsoom, explained one of them, and save our richest favors for the fighting man. When I was ready to depart, they furnished me with a small domestic bullthoat, as is used for saddle purposes by all red Martians. The animal's about the size of a horse and quite gentle, but in color and shape an exact replica of its huge and fierce cousin of the wilds. The brothers had supplied me with a reddish oil which I anointed my entire body, and one of them cut my hair, which had grown quite long in the prevailing fashion of the time, square at the back and banged in the front, so that I could have passed anywhere upon Barsoom as a full-fledged red Martian. My medal and ornaments were also renewed in the style of a Zidangian gentleman attached to the house of Tor, which was the family name of my benefactors. They filled a little sack at my side with Zidangan money. The medium of exchange upon Mars is not dissimilar from our own, except the coins are oval. Paper money is issued by individuals as they require it and can be redeemed twice yearly. If a man issues more than he can redeem, the government pays his creditors in full, and the debtor works out the amount on the farms or in the mines, which are all owned by the government. This suits everybody except the debtor, as it's been a difficult thing to obtain sufficient voluntary labor to work the great isolated farmlands of Mars, stretching as they do like narrow ribbons from pole to pole, through wild stretches peopled by wild animals and wilder men. When I mentioned my inability to repay them for their kindness, to me, they assured me that I would have ample opportunity if I lived long upon Barsoom, and bidding me farewell, they watched me until I was out of sight upon the broad white turnpike. All right, gang, that is it for the night. I'm really loving this. I'm really looking forward to reading more of this. I can't wait to finish this next week. This will be so fun. Um, and I will rustle up those illustrations for next week. Don't worry. Uh, anything else? More one shot next week. One shot the RPG. On Tuesday of next week. Like I said that night. We will be continuing to have game night on Tuesday until I finish one shot, which is probably another 2 weeks. But stay posted. I'll post about it in the Discord. I'll post about it on Twitter. I might post about it on Tumblr. Who knows? I'll post about it places so you know. What else? After one shot's done, we'll be doing something else. But Fridays as usual for paper cuts, and we'll finish this book up next week, very likely. And we'll see if I can find a way to have a watch party for John Carter. I don't know. It would be in the Discord if I can get it to work. Keep one eye on there. This is the last I'm going to say about it, just in case it does or does not happen. Just keep one eye on the Discord for that one. Anything else? Podcast episodes. Podcast episodes were yesterday. No, 2 days ago now. The podcast is currently on Dracula. The podcast feed exists. I want to make it clear. I know I link the Libsyn page every time I'm talking about the podcast, but it is available in your favorite podcatcher. Just look up Paper Cuts, and it's the one with the snow, with the familiar snow background. We are approaching 90 episodes in the backlog for you to catch up on. There's all 60 episodes of season 1, and we are 24 episodes through season 2. We're in the middle of Dracula. I would really appreciate, especially if you'd listen to Dracula. I've been putting a lot of work into those. I don't think I have anything else to plug. Podcast listeners. Speaking of podcast listeners, did you know you can rate the podcast on Spotify? I didn't know Spotify had podcast ratings until a couple weeks ago. Give me some ratings. Whatever you think I deserve. Give me some iTunes reviews. Leave comments. I love having community input. There's a reason I push the Discord so much. I think that's everything. Yeah. We'll be finishing this book next week. Come back on Tuesday for some more one shot. This has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it